You wake up and decide to skip your morning run. You tell yourself it's because you didn't sleep well. But maybe that's not the full story. Maybe you just didn't feel like it. Maybe the weather looked cloudy and gloomy. Maybe your motivation faded overnight. The reason you gave? It sounds right. It makes sense. It helps you move on with your day. But it might not be true. This is the introspective illusion. It's the idea that we believe we understand our thoughts, feelings, and motives better than we actually do. We don't like to admit that we often act on instinct, emotion, or habit. When asked why we made a choice, we come up with an explanation. That explanation might not match the real cause, but we believe it anyway. In one famous study, researchers placed identical pairs of socks on a table. Participants were asked to pick the best pair. Most people chose the pair on the far right. When asked why, they gave reasons like, the color looks brighter, or this one feels softer. They didn't know that all the socks were the same. What they chose wasn't based on quality, but position. Still, their explanations came easily and confidently. The same thing happens with more complex choices. A person might pick a political candidate because they seem confident on television. But if asked, they might say it's because of the candidate's policies. The real reason might be subconscious, based on body language or tone of voice. The explanation, however, is clean and logical. It protects the belief that the choice was thoughtful. In another study, shoppers looked at several identical blouses. After choosing their favorite, they were asked why. One woman said, "I like the pattern on this one," but the pattern was the same on all of them. She didn't realize her choice may have been shaped by the blouse's location on the table, or the way it caught the light. But her mind still found a reason. This doesn't mean people lie. It means the brain fills in blanks. We feel something, a pull toward one thing or away from another. But we often can't access the reason behind it. So we tell ourselves a story. That story helps us make sense of what we did. It allows us to keep seeing ourselves as rational, consistent people. The illusion runs deep. Even in serious decisions, like choosing a partner or a job, people often misread their own motives. Someone might marry because we share the same goals, when it's really about comfort or timing. A person might take a job because of the mission, but maybe they liked the office layout or wanted to move to that city. The reasons we give feel true because they fit the story we want to believe. In the 1970s, psychologists Timothy Wilson and Richard Nisbett ran an experiment that helped shape our understanding of this illusion. They showed participants several pairs of stockings, then asked them to pick the best quality pair. Again, all the stockings were the same. Yet participants gave confident reasons for their choices. When researchers pointed out the stockings were identical, many people refused to accept it. They clung to their reasons. This tells us something important. People don't just guess at reasons. They believe them. The illusion isn't about lying to others. It's about being mistaken within your own mind. We think we're reporting facts about our choices. In reality, we're often narrating a guess made after the fact. This happens in daily life. A person might say, "I didn't go to the party because I had a headache." But maybe they were nervous about seeing someone there. Or they just didn't want to go. The headache might be real, but not the core reason. Still, it becomes the official explanation. The illusion affects how we judge others too. When someone cuts us off in traffic, we assume they're rude or selfish. We rarely say, maybe they're late for something important. But when we do the same thing, we say, "I was running late," or "I didn't see them." We excuse ourselves with context. We explain others with character. This is called the actor-observer bias, and it connects with the introspective illusion. We think we know why we act, but we guess at why others do. It also affects memory. You might remember quitting a job because of low pay, but at the time, it might have been burnout or conflict with a coworker. The pay issue becomes the remembered cause because it's simple and socially acceptable. It fits the way you want to tell your story now. In relationships, This illusion can cause tension. One partner might say, "You only said that to hurt me," but the other truly believes they had a different reason. When both people trust their own stories too much, they can't see each other clearly. Misunderstandings grow. Each person thinks the other is being dishonest or cold, but both may be under the same illusion. You can't turn off the introspective illusion, but you can learn to notice it. You can start to question the first reason that comes to mind. Was that really why I did it? Is there something I'm not admitting, even to myself? The goal isn't to distrust everything you feel. It's to stay open to complexity. Imagine watching a video of yourself making a choice. You pause it right before the decision. Could someone else, with no access to your thoughts, predict what you'd choose based on cues, your body language, mood, surroundings? In many cases, yes, our choices follow patterns we don't always notice. And the stories we tell after are often neat and simple. This doesn't make us irrational. It makes us human. The brain wants order. It doesn't like blanks or mystery. When faced with a gap in understanding, it fills it. That's not a flaw. It's how we cope with a complex world. Knowing this, you can be more careful when judging others. You can pause before explaining your own choices. You can ask yourself what else might be at work, and you can accept that sometimes the answer won't be clear. That's not weakness. That's honesty. ... You walk into a job interview. You sit straighter, speak more carefully, and avoid certain jokes. Later that night, you're out with old friends. You lean back, talk loosely, and laugh in a way you didn't at the interview. Both moments feel like you, but they're clearly different. So which one is the real version? People often talk about being true to themselves. They say things like, "I just want to be authentic," or "that didn't feel like the real me." But when you look closely, the idea of a fixed, true self doesn't hold up. You don't act the same with your boss as you do with your sibling. You don't speak the same way when you're tired as when you're energized. Your identity shifts depending on who you're with, where you are, and what you're doing. That's not being fake. That's being human. The authentic self is often treated as something deep inside you, waiting to be found. But that version doesn't exist. What feels authentic one day can feel off the next. You might say, "I'm not the kind of person who enjoys parties." Then 2 months later, you find yourself loving a night out. Did your authentic self change, or were both versions real? Researchers have studied how people describe themselves. When asked to list traits, people often give broad answers like, "I'm kind," or "I'm introverted." But when asked how they act in specific situations, the picture becomes less clear. Someone might act outgoing at work, quiet at home, and loud with old friends. So which version is authentic? Most people would say all of them, yet they still hold on to the idea of a core self. The trap comes from chasing consistency. We want to believe there's a stable version of us, unchanging and pure. But identity is built through behavior. It isn't locked inside. It grows and adapts. A person who sees themselves as honest might tell a lie to spare someone's feelings. That doesn't make them fake. It means honesty, like any value, plays out differently depending on context. Imagine someone who always spoke their mind, no matter the situation. They might say they're being authentic, but would that always be right? In a moment of grief, when someone is hurting, blunt honesty can feel cold. In those times, people often choose to be gentle instead. That choice isn't fake. It shows they care about more than self-expression. They respond to the moment, not just to their own preferences. Another example is language. You might speak in slang with close friends, switch to formal speech at work, and use a different tone entirely with a child. Are you being fake in any of those cases? No, you're adjusting. That adjustment isn't betrayal. It's skill. You're reading the room, listening, responding. You're not hiding your true self. You're shaping it in real time. Social roles also shape identity. A teacher might feel calm and clear-headed in the classroom, but awkward at a party. A parent might act patient at home and ambitious at work. These shifts aren't masks. They're expressions of different parts of the self. Trying to be the same across all roles isn't honest, it's rigid. People aren't meant to be static. Some chase their real self like a goal. They take personality tests or go on retreats, hoping to discover who they really are. But identity isn't discovered, it's created. You don't dig down to find it. You build it over time. That means it can shift, not just across moments, but across years. Who you were at 20 is not who you are at 40. That change doesn't mean you were fake then or now. It means you grew. Still, the pressure to be authentic can create confusion. Someone might turn down a new opportunity because it doesn't feel like me. But what if it's just unfamiliar? What if it could become part of them over time? When you expect your identity to stay fixed, you block growth. You miss chances to stretch and evolve. In relationships, the trap can show up in different ways. A person might say, "I can't be myself around them." Sometimes that's true, and the relationship isn't safe or healthy. But other times, it means they feel unsure about how they're showing up. They expect to feel one way all the time. When that feeling shifts, they assume something's wrong, but feelings shift with context. Doubt, discomfort, and change are normal. They don't mean you're being false. There's also a myth that children are more authentic than adults. People say kids haven't learned to fake it yet. But even children shift behavior across settings. A child might be loud at home and quiet at school. They watch, adjust, and learn. They don't always say what they feel or want. They pick up social cues early. They know when to speak and when to hold back. That's not dishonesty, it's development. The idea of one true self often gets tangled with values. People say being authentic means sticking to your principles. But even values can play out differently depending on the situation. Loyalty might mean defending a friend in one case and being honest with them in another. Compassion might look like support today and challenge tomorrow. Being authentic doesn't mean acting the same way every time. It means acting in a way that fits your values and the moment. People also confuse authenticity with comfort. If something feels easy or natural, they say it's authentic. If it feels hard or unfamiliar, they say it's not them. But growth feels strange at first. Trying a new skill, stepping into a new role, or changing a habit often feels unnatural. That discomfort doesn't mean the choice is false. It means you're stretching into something new. A clear example is learning to lead. Someone who sees themselves as quiet might avoid taking charge. When asked why, they say, "That's not me." But if they try, they might find they're capable of leading in their own way. They might lead through listening, or by organizing well, or by staying calm under pressure. They don't have to become someone else. They just have to expand what me can mean. Over time, you collect experiences, memories, habits, and roles. Each one adds to the picture. There's no single layer underneath it all. Instead, there's a shifting set of patterns: how you speak, think, act, and react. They don't always match. That's not a flaw. That's the shape of being alive. When people let go of the need to be one fixed thing, they often feel lighter. They stop forcing themselves into a narrow frame. They stop calling growth inauthentic. They start seeing identity as something they can work with, not something they have to protect. You're not a single story. You're not a locked identity waiting to be revealed. You're a set of shifting responses to the world around you. That doesn't make you fake. It makes you flexible. And flexibility, not fixedness, is often what allows people to live with more honesty, not less. You walk into your kitchen and flip the light switch. The light turns on just like always. You don't stop to think about it. You don't wait for visual proof before you move forward. Your brain already predicted that the room would light up. If the bulb were dead, you'd notice, but only because your brain's guess would be wrong. Most of the time, your brain gets it right and you move on without thinking. That's how you live day to day, not by reacting to what you see, but by relying on what your brain expects. This is the predictive brain in action. People often believe they see the world exactly as it is. But your brain doesn't wait for input before it tells you what's happening. It builds a model of the world and fills in the gaps. What you call perception is mostly prediction. Your senses fine-tune what the brain has already guessed. When things go as expected, the brain doesn't stop to check. It only updates when there's a surprise. Think about walking through your home in the dark. You reach for a doorknob without seeing it. You step around furniture without looking down. You know where things are, so your brain fills in the layout. If someone moved a chair while you were out, you'd only notice when your shin hit it. That's prediction breaking down. The pain forces your brain to adjust the model. Until then, you weren't checking with your eyes. You were trusting your internal map. This process starts early in life. A baby hears a sound and turns its head. Over time, the brain connects sounds with events. A creaking floorboard means someone's coming. The clink of a spoon means food. The brain learns to guess. By the time you're an adult, those guesses feel instant and obvious. You don't think, that noise might be the door. You just know. But that knowing is built on prediction, not just raw input. Vision works the same way. The eyes send a stream of data to the brain, but that data is full of noise. Light hits the retina upside down and scattered. The brain turns it into a stable image, but it doesn't build that image from scratch every time. It predicts what should be there based on memory, experience, and context. If you glance at a tree, your brain fills in the trunk even if branches block part of it. You see a full object because your brain expects one. Sometimes the brain's predictions override your senses completely. In optical illusions, for example, the image doesn't change, but your brain insists on seeing something that isn't there. The famous checker shadow illusion shows two squares that look different in color, but they're the same. Your brain adjusts for shadow and assumes brightness. It's trying to correct the input based on what it expects in the real world, and it sticks to that correction, even when you know it's wrong. Hearing also follows this pattern. When someone speaks in a noisy room, you often understand them even if you miss some words. That's not because your ears caught every sound. It's because your brain filled in the gaps based on context. You don't just hear speech, you predict what makes sense. When someone says, "I went to the," your brain might expect store or park based on the situation. That guess shapes what you actually hear. There's an experiment where people listen to a distorted sentence that sounds like noise. The first time, it makes no sense. But once they hear the clear version, they can't unhear it. On replay, the noise suddenly sounds like the original sentence. Their brain learned the pattern and applied it retroactively. That's prediction changing perception. You don't just see or hear the world, you interpret it through the lens of expectation. This has real-world effects. In sports, an experienced player can react faster than someone new, not because their body moves quicker, but because their brain predicts better. A tennis player sees the angle of a swing and already knows where the ball will go. They don't wait for the ball to arrive. They move before it's hit. That's not magic, it's prediction, fine-tuned over time. Prediction also affects emotions. Imagine you walk into a room expecting a warm welcome, but people look away. You might feel rejected. If you expect coldness and people nod politely, you might feel relief. The actions of others haven't changed, but your brain's model of what should happen affects how you feel. You don't just experience the moment, you compare it to what you thought would happen. That difference shapes your response. Pain works this way too. If you expect something to hurt, it often hurts more. Studies show that people who believe a treatment will help feel better even when given a placebo. The brain predicts relief, and the body follows. In the same way, expecting harm can make a mild sensation feel worse. The brain doesn't just process pain. It helps create it by shaping how it's felt. Prediction saves time and energy. If you had to analyze every sound, sight, or motion from scratch, you'd freeze. The brain's guesses let you function fast and with focus. but they also leave you blind to surprises. You might walk past a friend in a crowd because your brain didn't expect to see them there. You might misread a sign because you saw what you assumed it said, not what it did. When prediction goes unchallenged, it can block accurate perception. This illusion, that you see the world as it is, makes you overconfident. You think your view is neutral and direct, but most of the time, it's filtered through what your brain expects to find. That's not a flaw. It's how the system works. You move through life by predicting what will happen next. You only stop and adjust when something feels wrong. Understanding this helps in moments of confusion. When things don't look right or sound right, it's often because your brain's model is off. Instead of blaming the world, it can help to ask what you were expecting. What pattern did your brain rely on? What assumption got challenged? Sometimes, just being aware of the prediction can clear things up. You live in a loop of guessing and correcting. The brain constantly updates its model of the world, testing each prediction against what the senses report. When the guess is right, you don't notice. When it's wrong, you do. Most of life passes as predicted, and that's why it feels smooth. But it's also why surprise can feel so sharp. The prediction breaks, and for a moment, you see what's really there, not what you expected. That flash of raw input is rare, but it shows how much of daily life happens inside your head, shaped by guesses that mostly go unnoticed. You reach for a glass of water and take a sip. It feels automatic. You don't doubt that you decided to reach, moved your hand, and drank the water. You feel in control. That's what most people call agency, the sense that you are the one causing your actions. But the brain doesn't work in such a direct way. In many cases, it can be fooled. You can feel like you moved when you didn't, or believe you chose something after the fact. This gap between action and awareness shows up most clearly in split brain cases and in experiments with robotic limbs. The brain has two hemispheres, left and right. In most people, these halves talk through a thick bundle of nerves called the corpus callosum. But in rare medical cases, such as severe epilepsy, doctors have cut this connection to reduce seizures. The result is a split brain. Each half still works, but the communication between them breaks down. That's when strange things start to happen. In one well-known study, researchers showed different images to each eye. Since each eye connects more strongly to one side of the brain, they could control what each half saw. One side might see a chicken foot, the other might see a snowy scene. Then, the person was asked to point to a related image. The right hand, controlled by the left brain, pointed to a chicken. The left hand, controlled by the right brain, pointed to a shovel. When asked to explain the choice of the shovel, the person using the left hemisphere, which had only seen the chicken foot, said, "Oh, the shovel is to clean the chicken coop." That explanation made no sense based on what was actually seen, but it felt natural to the speaker. The brain didn't notice the real cause. It just made up a reason that fit the action. This kind of gap isn't limited to people with split brains. Researchers have also created illusions of agency in healthy people. In one setup, a person moves a robotic hand using a joystick. But then, without telling the person, the robot moves on its own. If the movement happens close to the time when the person made a motion, they still feel like they caused it. Their brain connects the intention with the result, even if the connection isn't real. The key here is timing. If the outcome happens right after the brain predicts it, the person feels like they did it. The brain builds agency not from full control, but from a match between what it expects and what it sees. If that match lines up, the brain assumes it caused the action. It doesn't check the full path. It just looks for signals that agree. Other experiments use a rubber hand. A fake hand is placed in front of the person while their real hand is hidden. The fake and real hands are stroked at the same time. After a few minutes, the person starts to feel like the rubber hand is their own. If the fake hand is then hit, the person might flinch. The brain accepted the hand because it received matching input. What it saw and what it felt were close enough. Agency followed ownership. The person didn't just feel like the hand was theirs, they felt like they could control it. This illusion shows how the brain builds a sense of self around movement. It doesn't wait for full proof. It uses shortcuts. These shortcuts usually work, but they can break down. In cases of alien hand syndrome, often found in some split brain patients or those with damage to certain brain areas, a person's hand moves on its own. It might button a shirt the other hand just unbuttoned. The person sees the movement, but doesn't feel like they caused it. They might say, "My hand has a mind of its own." And in a way, it does. The motor system still works, but the link to conscious intention is missing. At the other end, the brain can claim agency when none exists. In one study, researchers played tones and lights that followed a person's button presses. Then they flipped it. The tones and lights happened first, but the brain adjusted its sense of time. The person still felt like they caused the outcome. The brain had expected a result, saw a pattern, and filled in the gap. The result matched the prediction, so the brain accepted the illusion of control. This system works well in most daily life. When you move, your brain sends signals to muscles and predicts the result. If you move your arm and see your arm move, that's a match. The sense of agency follows. But when the result doesn't match, the brain either updates its prediction or loses the sense of control. That's why movements feel off when your arm is numb or tired. The feedback doesn't match what you expected. That mismatch breaks the illusion, and you feel less in control. These illusions also show up in virtual reality. In VR environments, if a digital arm responds smoothly to your real movement, your brain starts to feel it as part of you. But if the arm lags or moves in unexpected ways, you lose that sense of ownership. The timing must be tight. The feedback must be accurate. If it is, your brain accepts the virtual body. If not, it rejects it. This shows how much agency relies on smooth, predictable feedback, not just on real control. You can even see this in small slips during typing. You press a key, expect the right letter, and move on. But if the key sticks or a different letter appears, you pause. The brain's prediction failed. You might feel surprise or even annoyance, not because of the mistake itself, but because the movement no longer felt like yours. That tiny gap broke the illusion. The brain doesn't track every nerve and muscle. It works by prediction and correction. Most of the time, your intention matches the result, so you feel in control. But that feeling is fragile. It depends on timing, feedback, and context. When those shift, your sense of agency can shift too, without you knowing it. What this means is that your experience of causing a movement is built after the fact. You act, the brain checks if the result fits the plan, and then it gives you credit. If it fits, you feel like the author of your action. If not, you feel confusion or even denial. The process is smooth, but not foolproof. And once you see how often the brain makes these guesses, you start to question just how much control you truly have over each motion. You hold the door open for someone at the coffee shop. You feel good about it. Later that day, you cut in line at the grocery store and tell yourself it's no big deal. You might not see a link between the two moments, but your brain does. After doing something kind or fair, people often feel licensed to bend the rules. They don't see themselves as acting badly. Instead, they think of it as a rare slip or a justified exception. This pattern is known as the moral credential effect. The effect shows up in small, everyday ways. A person donates to charity in the morning and cheats a little on their taxes in the evening. Someone speaks out against bias at work, then goes home and makes a joke they'd normally avoid. These acts may seem unrelated, but they often come from the same place. The brain keeps score, not of actions, but of identity. Once it sees a person as good, it becomes easier to excuse future choices that don't match that label. This isn't always a conscious process. People don't usually say, "I did one good thing, so now I can do something wrong." But they often feel less pressure to behave well after proving themselves. It's like earning credit that can be spent later. The credit comes not from how others see you, but from how you see yourself. Researchers have tested this in the lab. In one study, people were asked to choose between job candidates. Some were given a chance to endorse a highly qualified Black candidate. Later, when asked to make a second choice, those same people were more likely to favor a white candidate, even when the Black candidate was just as strong. The researchers found that by first acting in an unbiased way, the participants felt licensed to act in a biased way later. The first choice gave them moral cover. This doesn't mean people are lying or faking their values. It means the mind balances self-image against behavior. If you believe you're fair and kind, a small unfair or unkind act doesn't feel like a real threat to your identity. You see it as a slip, not a pattern. But if you hadn't done something good earlier, the same behavior might make you feel guilty or uncomfortable. That's why timing matters. The good deed sets the tone. It tells your mind, you're a good person, and that message sticks. The effect isn't limited to ethics. It can also affect how people treat goals. Someone who eats a healthy breakfast might reward themselves with junk food at lunch. A person who works hard all morning might slack off all afternoon. In each case, the brain uses the earlier act as a reason to let up. The good choice gives permission to make a worse one later. People often say they want to be consistent, but in practice, they want to feel balanced. They don't track whether every action lines up. They ask, do I still feel like the kind of person I want to be? If the answer is yes, they lower their guard. The result is a strange pattern. The more good you do, the easier it can become to justify a small wrong. This doesn't make good acts pointless, but it shows that being good doesn't always lead to being better. It can lead to resting on your image, and once that happens, self-reflection can fade. You think, I'm the kind of person who cares, and that belief blocks you from seeing when you've stopped caring in practice. In the workplace, this shows up in performance reviews. A manager who sees themselves as fair may give harsher feedback without realizing it. They believe their past fairness protects them from current bias. Or an employee who works late one week may cut corners the next. They feel they've earned the right to relax their standards. No one tells them to do this. It happens in the background, inside their own reasoning. We can also see the effect in social issues. A person might post about justice online, then dismiss real concerns from others in conversation. They feel they've already proven where they stand. So when someone challenges their behavior, they get defensive. They think, that's not who I am, because they've already established that identity in their own mind. The problem is that the earlier act of support now shields them from feedback that could help them grow. This same pattern can lead people to ignore their blind spots. A man who proudly supports women's rights may interrupt women more often in meetings than he realizes. A person who says they value diversity might still avoid voices that make them uncomfortable. They don't mean to do harm. They just assume their past actions speak for their present self. Even in parenting, the effect appears. A parent who spends a full day playing with their child may feel less guilty about being short-tempered at bedtime. Or one who gives lots of praise may not notice when they later ignore a problem. The earlier warmth covers the later lapse, at least in their own mind. Marketing studies show the effect too. Shoppers who buy green or ethical products sometimes end up making more selfish or indulgent purchases later. One good choice satisfies the need to feel responsible, and that reduces the pressure to keep making similar choices. The first decision builds the identity. The next ones don't have to match it perfectly. The effect works because people think in stories. They don't judge each act on its own. They look at the pattern, the narrative. If the story says, I'm good, They allow small exceptions. But if the story says, "I might not be," they pay closer attention. That's why someone trying to rebuild trust might behave more carefully than someone who feels they already have it. One sees their status as fragile. The other sees it as earned. Awareness helps, but only to a point. People can know about the effect and still fall into it. They might think, "I've done the work to be better," and use that to dismiss discomfort. The fix isn't to distrust all your good actions. It's to treat each one as a step, not a shield. Doing the right thing once doesn't mean you'll do it again. You still have to choose each time without relying on your past to make the case for you. This pattern shows that guilt doesn't always guide behavior. Sometimes avoiding guilt is as simple as reminding yourself of your past virtue. That reminder takes the edge off the need to reflect. It doesn't erase wrongdoing, but it softens the feeling that would usually follow. When the mind believes the overall picture looks good, it relaxes its grip. The moment feels smaller, safer, easier to overlook. That's how the cycle begins. One good act doesn't guarantee another. Sometimes it opens the door to its opposite. Say the word apple over and over. Apple, 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 apple. Keep going. After 30 repetitions, something strange happens. The word starts to sound hollow. It might even feel like nonsense. You know what an apple is. You can picture the shape, the color, the crunch. But the word starts to fall apart. It stops connecting to the thing it's supposed to represent. It becomes sound with no weight. This is called semantic satiation. Semantic satiation is the temporary loss of meaning that happens when you repeat a word too many times in a row. It's not a trick of speech. It's a glitch in how the brain links language to meaning. The word itself doesn't change. Your memory of the object doesn't vanish. What breaks is the connection between the two. The more you say the word, the more it slips out of place. This happens because of how the brain processes language. When you read or hear a word, your brain activates networks tied to its meaning. For a moment, you don't just see the letters or hear the sounds. You access a concept. That link is fast and automatic. You see chair, and you know what it is without thinking. You don't picture every chair you've seen. You just know. But that knowing has limits. Repeat the trigger too many times, and the system starts to stall. In simple terms, the brain gets tired of firing the same signal. The neurons involved in that concept become less responsive. They've done their job, and now they pause. While they're recovering, the word loses its grip. You still hear the sound, but it no longer pulls up the meaning. That's why apple can start to feel like a foreign word, or no word at all. It hasn't vanished, but your sense of it has gone quiet. This effect doesn't happen with every word. Some words resist it more than others, but common, concrete words often show it quickly. These are words with strong links to objects or actions, like hand, door, or run. When you repeat them, you feel the meaning dissolve. Abstract words, like justice or truth, can also lose meaning, but the experience feels different. Instead of sounding odd, they feel vague or empty. You might even start to question what the word really means. Try this with a word like real. Say it again and again. Real, real, real. After a while, it feels soft and strange. It stops pointing to anything clear. This doesn't mean you no longer believe in reality. It means your brain needs a break from holding the meaning in place. The repetition strips the word of its usual shortcut. Without that shortcut, you're left with sound. Writers and poets sometimes play with this effect on purpose. They repeat a word to draw attention to its shape or sound instead of its use. In a poem, saying blue again and again can turn it into rhythm instead of meaning. It becomes texture. It pulls the reader out of definition and into experience. That use of language breaks the normal flow of thought. And that break can feel strange or even deep. In real life, though, people rarely notice this effect. Most of the time, we don't repeat the same word over and over. We use words in varied ways, with context to hold the meaning steady. But the fact that meaning can slip so easily shows how thin the link between word and thought really is. We treat language as stable, but it runs on habit and speed. When the habit breaks, even simple words lose their grip. Semantic satiation isn't a sign of something wrong. It's just a side effect of how meaning is built in the brain. The systems that give us language are fast and flexible, but they're not endless. Like a muscle, they tire with overuse. When they do, you feel it not as pain, but as confusion. You wonder, is that really a word? Or, why does that sound so strange now? You've heard it your whole life, but now it feels off. That mismatch is the illusion. The same kind of breakdown happens in other areas. Think of a smell that fades after a few minutes. You walk into a bakery and it smells rich and sweet, but after a while, you stop noticing it. The smell hasn't gone away. Your nose has just adapted. The brain filters out what it sees as old input. Semantic satiation works in a similar way. The brain hears the word again and again and starts to tune it out. It no longer responds with meaning. It says, "I've already processed this." You can also see something like this in faces. Look in the mirror and stare at your own eyes. Hold that gaze for a full minute without blinking or looking away. The face can start to look strange, unfamiliar. You might notice odd shifts in expression or form. This is called visual adaptation. The neurons that normally help you recognize a face begin to adjust. The image feels less stable. The face becomes just a pattern. Meaning drops away. The brain is tuned to change, not sameness. The point here isn't that language is broken. It's that it depends on a steady rhythm of novelty and repetition. When words are spaced out in time and context, their meaning feels solid. But when repetition piles up too fast, the brain stops responding. Meaning doesn't disappear forever. It comes back quickly once the system rests. But while it fades, you get a glimpse of how much your understanding relies on timing, memory, and context. This effect can even help explain how people become numb to certain words over time. Think of a word like freedom. It's used often in speeches, news, and slogans. The more people hear it without clear action or definition, the more it feels like noise. Not because it's false, but because repetition without fresh meaning dulls its power. It starts to sound hollow. That's semantic satiation on a larger scale. The word hasn't changed, the response has. Knowing this helps when words feel flat or distant. It shows that meaning isn't fixed. It's made in the moment, by a brain that wants to move forward. When you repeat a word and it stops working, you're not losing the word. You're seeing what holds it up. You're seeing how meaning depends on contrast, context, and pause. Without those, even the most familiar words drift into sound. They keep their shape, but not their sense. And in that moment, you learn how fragile language really is. You walk under a ladder on the way to a meeting. Later that day, the meeting goes badly. You tell yourself it was probably just a coincidence, but part of you still wonders if the ladder had something to do with it. You know it shouldn't, but the thought sticks. This is the causal illusion, the mind's habit of seeing cause and effect where there is none. The brain is wired to look for patterns. It's what helps you learn. If you touch a hot stove and feel pain, you avoid doing it again. If you eat something and get sick later, you stay away from that food. This kind of thinking is useful. It keeps you safe. But the same system that helps you learn real causes can also trick you into seeing false ones. When two events happen close together, the brain assumes a connection, even if the link isn't real. This shows up in superstition. An athlete wears the same socks every game because they won while wearing them once. A student carries a lucky pen to every exam. A person avoids making big decisions on Friday the 13th. These beliefs feel comforting because they offer control. The world is full of chance and chaos, and the mind doesn't like that. When something bad or good happens, the brain wants to explain it. It wants a reason, even when there isn't one. Experiments show how quickly people build false links. In one study, volunteers watched a light flash on a screen. Sometimes it flashed after they pressed a button, and sometimes it flashed on its own. The timing was random, but many people believed they controlled the light. They said, "When I press the button, it lights up," even though their action had no effect. The light was just doing its own thing. Their brains linked the two events because they happened near each other in time. This same effect drives rituals. Before a test, someone might tap their pencil 3 times. Before boarding a plane, they might whisper a phrase. These acts don't change the outcome, but they feel like they do. The mind looks back and says, "The last time I did this, things went well." The habit becomes a rule. The rule becomes a belief. And soon it feels risky not to do it. Children show this early. A toddler might believe that clapping brings the sun out. A 5-year-old might think their thoughts caused a parent's headache. They haven't learned to test their ideas yet, but adults fall for the same tricks. They just use more complex examples. Instead of clapping for the sun, they believe in good luck charms or follow strict routines before job interviews. The logic is the same. Something happened and something else followed. The brain fills in a link. Causal illusion also feeds conspiracy thinking. When people see events they don't understand, they look for hidden forces. A power outage, a market crash, or a strange coincidence becomes part of a plan. They think, this can't be random. But randomness can look like a pattern. Flip a coin and get heads 5 times. It feels suspicious, but it's just one possible outcome. The odds didn't change. Your brain just doesn't like runs without explanation. A strong example comes from weather. People say, "It always rains when I wash my car." The mind notices these moments more than the times it doesn't rain. It gives weight to the match and ignores the mismatch. This is called confirmation bias. You remember the hits and forget the misses. Over time, it feels like a rule, even though it's not. The illusion can affect medical thinking too. Someone takes a vitamin and then feels better. They believe the pill worked, even if the timing was random. If the symptoms would have improved anyway, they don't notice. They connect the two events and form a belief. This is why drug trials use control groups. Without them, even doctors can fall for false links. You can't trust improvement alone. You have to rule out chance. In the 1960s, psychologist B.F. Skinner showed that pigeons act on this illusion. He gave food to birds at random intervals. The pigeons started doing strange things, turning in circles, bobbing their heads, because they believed their actions brought the food. One bird spun in place. Another pecked the corner of the cage. They repeated these motions over and over. To them, it worked once. That was enough. Humans do the same. The logic goes like this. I did X and Y happened. Therefore, X caused Y. But causation takes more than timing. It takes a clear mechanism and a repeatable link. If you water a plant and it grows, that's cause and effect. But if you wear a red shirt and ace a test, there's no real connection. Still, it feels real. And feeling can override reason. Causal illusion is strong when outcomes are uncertain. If a situation is predictable, your brain can test its guesses. But when the result is random or delayed, the brain struggles. You throw salt over your shoulder and avoid bad luck. You knock on wood and hope things go well. These acts give a sense of control in situations where you have none. They help with stress, but they're based on error. The illusion also affects group behavior. In business, a leader might credit a new slogan for a sudden rise in sales. In truth, the market changed or a competitor made a mistake. But the timing fits the story. The company keeps the slogan and tells a success story that isn't true. The belief shapes future choices, even if it rests on a false link. Social media can strengthen this illusion. If you post something and it gets lots of attention, you may think the content caused the result, but the timing, algorithm, or even luck could be the real cause. Still, you try to repeat the act. You chase a formula that may not exist. The brain wants to turn chance into plan. Even in personal life, this shows up. You meet someone on a certain day, in a certain mood, and things go well. You try to recreate the mood next time. Wear the same shirt, take the same route. You want the same result. You act as if you can summon it. The idea that you can shape outcomes gives comfort, but it also clouds judgment. People build meaning around coincidence. They make patterns from noise. This helps when the guess is right, but it misleads when the guess is wrong. Seeing patterns is a strength, but unchecked, it becomes a flaw. When the brain refuses to see randomness, it invents control. The latter becomes bad luck. The shirt becomes magic. The bird spins in its cage. And the person, certain they understand the world, follows a trail that was never there. You remember your 10th birthday. The cake was chocolate, the candles were blue, and your cousin tripped and spilled punch on the rug. Or at least, that's what you think happened. But there's a good chance that at least one part of that memory is wrong. Maybe the cake was vanilla. Maybe the candles were red. Maybe it wasn't your cousin, but your friend from school who spilled the punch. You're not lying. Your brain just rewrote the memory without telling you. This is the reconstructive memory illusion. People tend to think of memory like a file cabinet. You store a memory, and when you need it, you take it out and read it. But that's not how the brain works. Memory is active, not passive. Each time you recall a memory, you rebuild it from pieces. You combine facts, guesses, emotions, and bits of later experience. Then you save that version again. Over time, the memory changes. Think of it like opening a document on your computer, making small edits and clicking save. The next time you open it, those edits are now part of the file, but you might not remember making them. That's what your brain does. When you remember something, you don't just retrieve it, you reshape it. And the more often you recall a memory, the more it drifts. Researchers have studied this in many ways. In one classic experiment, people watched a short video of a car accident. Later, they were asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Other groups were asked the same question, but with different verbs: smashed, collided, or bumped. The wording changed the memory. People who heard smashed reported higher speeds and were more likely to say they saw broken glass, even though there was none. The brain took the suggestion and folded it into the memory. This happens outside the lab too. A family tells the same story at every holiday. Each person adds a detail. A joke becomes a fact. A mix-up turns into a punchline. After years of telling it, everyone remembers the same version, even if it never happened that way. The repetition helps the memory feel stable, but the story has changed. Eyewitness accounts often fall into this trap. A person sees a crime and gives a report. Later, they see photos, talk to others, or read news articles. These new inputs change what they remember. They don't notice it. They feel sure they're telling the same story, but their brain has merged what they saw with what they learned later. Memory doesn't warn you when it updates itself. Even small cues can shape a memory. If someone says, "Wasn't it cold that day?" you might remember shivering, even if the weather was warm. The suggestion becomes part of the recall. You feel like you remembered it, but really, you just built a new version using someone else's idea. You can also insert whole events. In one study, researchers gave people short paragraphs describing events from their childhood. Some were true, based on facts from family. One was false. It said the person got lost in a mall at age 5. At first, most people said they didn't remember it, but after a few days, many remembered the event in detail. They described the store, the fear, the reunion with a parent. None of it happened. But once their brains started to build the memory, it felt real. This shows how memory is less like a recording and more like a story. You don't play back the past. You rebuild it each time based on what you think should have happened. You use bits of images, sounds, feelings, and logic. Your brain fills in the blanks with what seems right. That's why your memories usually feel coherent. They make sense to you, but that doesn't mean they're true. Sometimes you mix up events. You might say, "I met her at that concert," when really, you met at a different place the same week. The brain stores pieces of the past in different areas, sights in one part, sounds in another, emotional tone somewhere else. When you try to recall a moment, the brain pulls these pieces together, but it doesn't always line them up correctly. Other times, you borrow from your own imagination. You think about what you would have done in a situation, and that imagined action becomes a false memory. You say, "I told him I didn't agree," but maybe you only thought about saying it. The difference fades. If you pictured it clearly enough, the brain treats it like a real event. Reconstructive memory isn't a bug in the system. It's part of how the brain works. By rewriting memories, your brain keeps them flexible. You can learn, grow, and change your view of the past. If you once saw a breakup as awful, you might later see it as necessary. That shift reflects an emotional update, not a factual one, but it shapes the memory all the same. This process also helps you build a consistent self. You don't remember every version of who you were. You remember the version that fits your current sense of identity. If you see yourself as confident now, you're more likely to recall moments of confidence from the past. You might downplay or forget times you hesitated. The memory reshapes to fit the self. That's why memory feels both real and slippery. You're sure of it. You can picture the moment, hear the words, feel the emotion, but you're remembering the latest version, not the original. You've opened the file, made silent edits, and hit save again. And the more you remember it, the more it changes. This helps explain why people can argue about shared events. Two friends remember the same night in different ways. Each is sure they're right. They're not lying. They've just built different versions over time. Their brains didn't keep a clean copy. They kept updating, based on what they felt, what they learned, and what mattered most. Memory feels like truth, but it's closer to belief. Each time you reach into the past, you grab a story shaped by the present. You think you're recalling a fixed moment, but you're building a new one, layered, edited, and changed by every telling. You forget where you left your keys. Later, you tell someone, "I must have put them on the counter when I got home." You feel sure about it. You can even picture it in your mind. But you never actually saw yourself do it. Your brain filled in the missing piece, and now that guess feels like a fact. This is confabulation, when your brain makes up details to fill memory gaps, and you believe those details without knowing they're false. Confabulation isn't lying. It's not meant to trick others. It's the brain trying to make a story complete. When something is missing, the brain builds a bridge. That bridge might be wrong, but it feels real. You don't notice the guesswork because it fits the pattern of what you expect. This often happens with minor things. You can't recall if you locked the front door, so your brain assumes you did, because you usually do. You can't remember exactly what your coworker said, so you recall something close that fits their usual tone. These invented pieces help keep your memory stable. They protect your sense of continuity. You feel like you remember, even when you don't. But the illusion gets stronger when emotion is involved. Think about a tense conversation you had years ago. You might remember what you said, how the other person reacted, and how the room felt. But some of that detail may be false. You may believe they rolled their eyes. Even if they didn't, you may think you stayed calm when in fact you raised your voice. Over time, your brain smoothed the story, added emotion, or removed tension. It didn't do this to trick you. It did it to protect you or to help you make sense of the past. In one study, people were shown a short film, then asked questions about it later. Some of the questions included false details. When asked, "Did you see the man with the mustache?" people often said yes, even though no such man appeared. When they were tested again later, they included the mustache in their description of the film. The brain had accepted the fake detail and added it to the memory. This kind of patchwork can spread. If you remember the man with the mustache, you might also remember what color his coat was, what he said, or where he stood. Each added piece makes the memory feel stronger, not weaker. The more complete the story, the more confident you feel. But the confidence doesn't mean the story is true. It just means it fits well in your mind. Doctors see confabulation most clearly in people with brain injury or memory disorders. Someone with amnesia may not remember what happened yesterday, but will still try to explain their day. If asked why they're in the hospital, they might say, "I'm here to visit my cousin," even though they don't have a cousin nearby. That story might change the next day. The person isn't lying. Their brain is doing its best to fill in the blank. In less severe cases, healthy people confabulate all the time. You might forget a friend's birthday and then say, "Oh, knew it was this week. I just got busy." That may be true. Or it might be your brain building a reason to explain the gap. The false memory feels easier to accept than simply saying, "I forgot." One experiment showed how quickly the mind can invent. Volunteers were asked why they picked one face over another in a quick photo choice. But researchers secretly switched the photo after the selection. The person ended up explaining a choice they didn't actually make, and most of them didn't notice the switch. They gave reasons: she looked more trustworthy, or he had a kind smile. Even though they hadn't chosen that person, their brains made the story fit what they saw, even if the facts were wrong. The same happens in everyday choices. You buy one brand of cereal over another. Later, you say it's because of the ingredients. But maybe the real reason was that the box was eye level or the design was familiar. The brain picks the detail that feels logical and tells a clean story. That story becomes your reason, even if it's not the real cause. Confabulation grows stronger when details fade. The longer ago something happened, the more gaps there are for the brain to fill. You remember a vacation and describe a sunset that never happened. Or you recall a childhood pet and add traits from a movie dog. These edits happen quietly. They don't feel like invention. They feel like memory. Social situations also trigger this effect. If your group remembers an event a certain way, you may adopt their version, even if your memory was different. Over time, your mind rewrites your version to match theirs. You say, "Yes, that's how I remember it too," and you mean it. The brain wants to keep your story aligned with the people around you. The pressure to fit the group can reshape your personal history. This can lead to false confessions, especially in high-stress situations. A person questioned for hours may start to imagine scenes suggested by the interrogator. They picture doing something they didn't do. That image becomes clearer with repetition. In time, they may believe it. The confession is false, but the belief is real. Their mind built a memory to match the pressure and filled the void with a story that made sense under stress. Confabulation isn't always a problem. Most of the time, the small edits your brain makes help you move through life with a steady sense of self. You don't need perfect recall to function. You need a clear enough story. The issue comes when the edits go too far or when you trust them too deeply. A strong feeling of certainty can block you from checking the facts. You may remember a conversation that never took place. You may believe someone said something they didn't. You may feel sure you already sent that email, or locked the door, or returned the call. When challenged, you might insist because the memory feels true. But it only feels that way because the brain did its job too well. It completed the picture, added the missing parts, and made the whole thing feel seamless. Understanding this doesn't stop the illusion. You will still fill gaps. You will still trust invented details. But knowing the pattern lets you be more careful. When someone remembers differently, you can pause instead of defend. When a detail feels too perfect, you can ask if it might be a patch. You can hold your memories with a lighter grip, knowing that truth in the brain isn't always the same as truth in the world. You close your eyes and picture your next vacation. You imagine the airport, the hotel, the view from the window. It feels like you're looking into the future, like your mind is reaching forward to preview something real. But what you're seeing isn't the future. It's the past, rearranged. Your brain is not building something new from nothing. It's recycling old parts, memories, scenes, patterns, and assembling them into a guess. That guess feels solid, but it's mostly a projection built from what you've already seen, done, or heard. This is the illusion of mental time travel. You feel like you're imagining the future, but you're really walking through a set of memories in disguise. Your brain treats this as useful. By pulling pieces from the past, it builds a model of what might happen. That model helps you prepare. You think through a job interview, a conversation, or a big move. But no matter how vivid the image, it's not a preview. It's a remix. Studies show that the same brain regions activate when you recall the past and when you imagine the future. In both cases, the brain draws from stored material, places you've been, people you've met, situations you've survived. That overlap is why your imagined future feels so real. It uses the same circuits. But because it feels real, you trust it more than you should. Think about planning a wedding. You might imagine the walk down the aisle, the music, the weather, but your brain fills in those blanks based on other events you've seen. Weddings on TV, ceremonies you've attended, even random images from ads. The emotion is real. The sense of control is real, but the scene is stitched together from old fabric. If the day doesn't go as planned, and it rarely does, you feel surprised, but the surprise comes from the gap between the imagined future and the actual event, not from a failure to plan. This illusion helps explain why people feel so confident about what lies ahead. You imagine a new job and believe you'll enjoy it. You see yourself living in a new city and assume it will suit you. The picture in your mind is clear, so it feels like a promise. But it's not based on the future itself. It's based on past jobs, past moves, past patterns. You build a story, not a forecast. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. The brain saves time by using what it already knows. It doesn't design futures from scratch. That would take too much effort. So it reuses elements from memory and adjusts them slightly. That's why you imagine waking up in a new apartment and still picture your current coffee mug or your usual morning routine. It's also why it's hard to picture how much you might change. Your brain reuses your current self to guess what you'll be like in 10 years. That guess usually underestimates how much your values, habits, and preferences will shift. The illusion can mislead. People often overestimate how happy or unhappy a future event will make them. You think winning a prize will bring lasting joy, or that failure will ruin your sense of self. But when the event arrives, it feels smaller or shorter than expected. The image was too clean. The brain left out noise, boredom, and routine. You imagined a future with sharp focus, but life unfolds in blur and detail. There's a name for this gap: affective forecasting error. It's the mismatch between what we expect to feel and what we actually feel when the time comes. Your brain imagines the future as a highlight reel, but life includes the pauses between scenes. When you picture buying a new car, you imagine the first drive, not the paperwork, the maintenance, or the commute on a bad day. That's because your brain borrowed the feeling of other firsts, not the whole picture. Mental time travel also shapes how we make decisions. You avoid an event because you picture feeling awkward, or you pursue a goal because you imagine the reward. But both images are guesses. They don't come from evidence. They come from how your brain combines memory with desire or fear. The image feels like a forecast, but it's not based on experience you haven't had yet. It's based on what you already know, tinted by what you want or dread. Sometimes this helps. If you can't picture yourself doing something, you may avoid it and avoid danger. But sometimes it hurts. If you can't imagine succeeding, you may never try. The failure isn't real yet. It's just an image your brain built from other failures. The future hasn't happened, but it feels already closed. You can also see this illusion when people reminisce about imagined futures that never came true. Someone might say, "I thought I'd be married by now," or "I always pictured myself living abroad." These images feel like memories, even though they're about events that never happened. They cause real grief or regret. The emotional weight comes from how real the image once felt. Children use mental time travel in simpler ways. A child might say, "When I grow up, I'll be a firefighter," and imagine a bright scene with sirens and bravery. They're not making a plan. They're combining what they've seen on television with the feeling of being strong or useful. Their vision is shaped entirely by the past. The future is just a container for it. Even in daily life, this illusion plays out in small ways. You picture how your lunch break will go or how a phone call will unfold. When reality doesn't match the image, you feel disappointed or caught off guard. Not because the event was bad, but because your brain gave you a preview that felt like a promise. Imagination matters. It helps you prepare, make choices, and plan. But it also misleads. When you picture the future, you're not seeing forward. You're seeing inward. Your brain builds scenes from memory, emotion, and habit. Then it shows you the image and says, "This is what's coming." But it's not. It's what you already know, dressed up as something new. You read a sentence like, "Hidden meaning transforms infinite silence into the doorway of truth," and something about it feels important. You pause. It sounds deep, but then you try to explain what it means, and nothing solid comes to mind. The words suggest a profound idea, but there's no clear content. This is the false depth effect, your brain's tendency to treat vague or abstract language as more meaningful than it really is. This effect shows up most often in spiritual, philosophical, or poetic language. The less clear a sentence is, the more room your brain has to fill in meaning. When you read something vague, your mind doesn't give up. It tries to decode it, to find a message hidden between the words. That effort can make the sentence feel deep, even if it's nonsense. You do the work, and then give the credit to the sentence. Researchers have tested this directly. In one study, people rated the depth of randomly generated statements like, "Imagination is inside exponential space-time events." Many rated them as highly meaningful. Others rated similar phrases with actual content, clear scientific facts or logical statements. On average, people gave higher scores to the vague nonsense. The more abstract and mystical the phrasing, the deeper it felt. This happens because of how the brain deals with uncertainty. When you see something unclear, your mind wants to resolve it. You search for meaning and look for patterns. If the language sounds serious or emotional, that adds weight. You assume there must be something important behind it, even when there isn't. The effect gets stronger when the words come from someone you see as wise or credible. If a teacher, guru, or public speaker uses vague language, you're more likely to assume it has meaning. You don't want to be the one who doesn't get it. So you nod along, even if you can't explain what they just said. The more confident the speaker, the more meaningful their words seem, even if those words are empty. This can lead to the pseudo-profundity bias, where people rate statements as profound based not on content, but on style. The right tone, rhythm, and vocabulary can create the illusion of depth. A phrase like "wholeness requires the awareness of universal energy" sounds like it means something, but try turning it into a testable claim. You can't. It feels wise, but it says nothing specific. Not all vagueness is meaningless. Some ideas are hard to express, and language can't always capture them directly. Poetry, metaphor, and symbolism can point to real insights. But the false depth effect doesn't depend on the idea itself. It depends on how the language feels. When clarity drops and emotion rises, the brain leans toward meaning, even when it isn't there. You can test this in daily life. Take a quote like, "The soul speaks through the silence between thoughts." Ask yourself what it actually means. Can you restate it in plain terms? Can you point to when it happens or how to measure it? If not, then the sentence is likely riding on rhythm and mood, not meaning. You're responding to the shape, not the message. This illusion also plays out in how people judge ideas they already agree with. If a vague sentence supports your views, you're more likely to call it wise. If it contradicts your views, you may call it vague or confusing. The meaning you assign depends more on your beliefs than on the content. That's part of why this illusion lasts. People protect the ideas that flatter them and dismiss the ones that don't. In some settings, false depth can serve a social purpose. A leader who speaks in lofty terms may gain support because their words feel noble. They give listeners room to project their own hopes and values into the message. The speaker sounds wise, even if they haven't said anything clear. This kind of speech helps people feel united, but it doesn't inform them. Marketing uses the same trick. A product might be described as unlocking the essence of your potential or guiding your energy toward harmony. These phrases feel rich, but they explain nothing. They don't tell you what the product does or how it works, but the language triggers the false depth effect. You assume the meaning is there, just out of reach. Even in personal conversations, this illusion shows up. A friend says, "Sometimes life takes us to where we already are," and you nod, not because you understand, but because the sentence feels thoughtful. You don't want to challenge it. You assume that if you fought harder, it would make sense. But often, there's nothing to find. The sentence only feels deep because your brain gave it more effort than it deserved. The false depth effect doesn't only fool others, it fools you too. When you write something vague that sounds wise, you may believe you've expressed a real insight. You feel proud of the sentence. It carries weight. But if you look again and try to explain it simply, the meaning may vanish. The illusion works from the inside as well as from the outside. This doesn't mean all vague language is useless. Some subjects are hard to talk about clearly, but if a sentence can't be tested, restated, or applied, it's worth asking whether it means anything at all. Not everything that sounds deep is deep. Not every insight needs fog to feel real. To spot this illusion, start by asking what a sentence is actually saying. Try to put it in plain language. If you can't do that without losing the message, the sentence may be empty. Also notice how you feel when you read it. If the emotion is strong but the meaning is weak, that's a clue. Real insight often survives translation. Pseudo-insight falls apart when the mood fades. The false depth effect doesn't make people gullible. It makes them human. The brain wants meaning. It looks for signals that something matters. When the signals are strong, through style, tone, or suggestion, the brain leans in. It fills the gaps. It rewards effort with belief. But sometimes, there's nothing underneath. Just a sentence that sounds like wisdom and says nothing at all. You step onto an escalator that isn't moving. For a split second, it feels wrong. Your body reacts as if it's moving even though it's not. That jolt comes from a mismatch between what you expected and what happened. You thought you knew what would follow. Your brain predicted control. When that prediction failed, your perception stumbled. This is one way to see the control perception loop. Your brain doesn't just take in the world as it is. It filters what you see, hear, and feel through the lens of how much control you think you have. If you believe you're in control, your surroundings feel clearer, more predictable, and less threatening. If you feel powerless, the same environment can seem more chaotic or harder to understand. That shift happens even if the facts stay change. In one study, researchers asked people to press a button, then showed them a tone that followed it. For some, the button actually triggered the tone. For others, the tone played on its own, with a short delay, but still seemed connected. People who believed they caused the sound judged the tone as happening sooner. Their sense of time changed based on their sense of control. They saw reality not as it was, but as it felt under their influence. This happens all the time in daily life. When you're driving a car, you feel in control, even when you're surrounded by other drivers. If someone cuts you off, you react, but you still believe you can steer, brake, or adjust. The road feels manageable. But if you're a passenger during the same situation, you may feel more nervous. You can't control the car, so your perception shifts. The same speed feels faster. The same traffic feels closer. Your sense of safety depends less on the facts and more on your role. The brain rewards the feeling of control. Even when that control is fake, it still affects what you perceive. In one experiment, participants were told to push a button to stop a painful stimulus. The button didn't actually change anything. It was a placebo. But the people who believed they had control rated the pain as less intense. Their perception of the pain dropped, not because the input changed, but because their brain filtered it differently. The belief shaped the experience. You also see this effect in games of chance. People rolling dice in a casino will throw harder when they want a high number and softer when they want a low one. They know the outcome is random, but they still feel as if their actions can shape it. That feeling of control, even when false, makes the game more engaging. It also makes losses easier to take. If you believe you had some hand in the result, it hurts less than believing you were just unlucky. People tend to see patterns more clearly when they believe they have control. In one task, volunteers were shown flashing symbols and asked to find a rule. Those who were told their actions influenced the symbols were more likely to report seeing patterns, even when there were none. Their belief in control changed what they perceived. The mind doesn't separate what's true from what's reassuring. It merges them. The same loop affects motivation. When people feel they can shape an outcome, they work harder and focus more. A student who believes they can improve their grades will study with more energy than one who believes the test is stacked against them. The effort feels worth it because the mind sees a path forward. That belief sharpens perception. Small gains feel like progress. Mistakes feel like signals, not failures. But when control fades, perception blurs. In studies of learned helplessness, animals exposed to repeated shocks they can't escape stop trying, even when a way out is later offered. People in similar conditions start to miss chances to improve their situation. They stop noticing changes that could help. Their perception narrows. The world seems fixed. The loop closes in the wrong direction. Less control leads to less awareness, which leads to more inaction. This loop also shows up in mental health. People with depression often report that time feels slower, colors seem duller, and sounds feel flat. These are perceptual shifts, not just emotional ones. When the brain expects failure or loss, it filters the world through that lens. The future feels less open. Attention shrinks. The brain prepares for less control, and the result is a less vivid world. On the other side, control can sharpen senses. In high-stress jobs where people have real influence, like air traffic controllers or surgeons, people report intense focus. They feel locked in. Their awareness heightens, not because the world changed, but because they believe their actions matter. The brain tunes perception based on that belief. Even in memory, this loop plays a role. People remember events more clearly when they felt in control. They recall more details and describe them with greater confidence. When you feel like a passive observer, memory fades faster. It becomes vague. Your brain tags the event as less important to future planning. In consumer behavior, this illusion is used on purpose. Websites may let users click through a series of options before revealing a fixed result. The outcome was never under their control, but the process made it feel that way. This keeps people engaged and makes them more satisfied, even when the result is the same for everyone. In conversation, the loop shapes what you hear. When you feel heard and respected, you focus more on the meaning of the words. When you feel ignored or powerless, your brain shifts toward tone or threat. The content may be the same, but the meaning you take from it is different. Your perception of language depends on your sense of agency in the moment. Children experience this as they grow. At first, Everything feels like it happens to them. As they learn, they can shape outcomes by crawling, pointing, speaking. Their world becomes more organized. Control helps them sort noise into signal. They notice patterns, predict reactions, and adjust their actions. Perception sharpens as control grows. When they're ignored or overruled too often, they may stop trying. The world becomes fuzzier, harder to read. The loop works in both directions. When you feel in control, your brain sharpens the world. When you feel powerless, it dulls your senses. This isn't just mood, it's perception. You literally see, hear, and feel things differently based on how much you believe your actions matter. Even if that control is fake, the brain uses it to shape your view of the world. It builds your reality on top of what you think you can change. You remember getting lost in a mall when you were a child. You can picture the store, the layout, the moment of panic. You remember your parents' face when they found you. The scene is clear. It feels real, but it never happened. Someone suggested it to you, maybe years ago, and your brain filled in the rest. Now it feels like your memory. You own it. This is the memory ownership illusion, your brain's ability to accept and store a false event as something that truly happened to you. This illusion doesn't need hypnosis or trickery. It just needs suggestion, repetition, and detail. In one experiment, researchers asked people to recall childhood events. Most of the events were real, provided by family members. But one event was fake, a made-up story about getting lost in a shopping mall at age 5. At first, participants said they didn't remember it, but after a few interviews, about a quarter of them remembered the fake event. They described how they felt. Some added new details. One said they remembered the smell of the store. Another mentioned the look on the face of the stranger who helped them. The memory had grown into a personal experience. This happens because memory doesn't work like a video recording. It works like reconstruction. You build each memory out of parts: real images, known places, emotions, and guesses. When someone gives you a suggestion, especially in a calm or trusting context, your brain searches for anything that might support it. You picture a mall. You remember what your parent looked like. You imagine being scared. Those pieces start to form a story. Once you tell it out loud, your brain tags it as something that happened. The next time you recall it, it feels like a memory, not an idea. False memories don't feel weak or vague. People often believe them with complete confidence. They pass lie detector tests. They include rich sensory detail, sounds, smells, colors. The brain treats them no differently from real memories. In fact, studies using brain scans show that false memories can activate the same areas as real ones. The difference lies in how the memory was formed, not in how it feels. This illusion also works with shared memories. A friend tells a story and says, "You were there too, remember?" You pause, think for a moment, and then agree. You picture the scene, laugh along, and eventually believe you were part of it. The more often the story is repeated, the more you feel like you experienced it. You might even start to add your own version of the event. Years later, you'd swear it happened just like you said. Memory ownership can also come from photos. If you see a doctored image of yourself as a child at a hot air balloon ride, you might start to recall the day. You fill in the feeling of floating, the sound of the wind, the smell of the field. In one study, researchers showed participants fake photos like this. Half of them came to believe the event really happened. The photo triggered the construction of a new memory. This doesn't mean people are gullible. It means the brain trusts its own stories. If a scene feels right and fits with what you know about your past, your brain accepts it. It gives you a sense of ownership. That memory becomes part of your identity. It may shape how you see yourself, how you make decisions, or how you feel about certain people. You think it explains why you hate crowds, why you love adventure, or why you're cautious in stores. But the root is fiction. Therapy sessions have shown how powerful this effect can be. In some cases, people have recovered memories of abuse, crime, or trauma that never happened. These aren't lies. They are products of strong suggestion and emotional pressure. A therapist might say, "Many people with your symptoms were abused as children." The client starts to wonder. The mind fills in gaps. A vague image becomes a scene becomes a memory. Once spoken, the memory feels true. Families have been torn apart by events that were never real, but fully believed. The justice system has faced serious challenges because of this. Eyewitnesses sometimes recall details they didn't see, especially if they talk to others or see media coverage. Their memories change without their awareness. They still believe they're telling the truth, but the truth has shifted. One famous case involved a man who was wrongly convicted based on a witness who later admitted she may have been influenced by police questions. The conviction was based on a confident memory, but it was built on suggestion. Children are especially vulnerable to this illusion. In one study, researchers asked kids about events that didn't happen, like shaking hands with a costumed character or spilling punch at a party. The more the kids were asked, the more likely they were to say yes and describe the scene. The children weren't lying. Their brains were doing what human brains do, turning repeated suggestions into remembered experiences. The illusion doesn't always need outside input. Sometimes you generate a false memory on your own. You think, "Did I lock the door?" You can't remember, so you picture yourself doing it. You imagine the key turning. That image becomes a memory. You feel sure you locked the door, even though you didn't. Later, when you realize the door was left open, you feel confused. The memory felt real, but it was only imagined. This illusion can affect your sense of who you are. You believe certain things about yourself because of what you remember. Maybe you think you've always been independent, cautious, or brave. You can name events that support it. But if one of those events was false, your self-image may be built partly on fiction. That doesn't mean your identity is fake. It means it's shaped by a system that can be misled. To see this in action, listen to a group of people recalling a shared event. Watch how stories shift. Someone adds a new twist. Another agrees, even if they remember it differently. Over time, the group settles on a version of the past. That version gets repeated, polished, and remembered. Everyone starts to believe it. The event becomes a shared memory, even if it didn't happen that way. The story becomes stronger than the facts. Your brain values coherence. It wants the past to make sense. When facts are missing, it fills them in. When details don't line up, it smooths them over. You walk away feeling confident in a memory that may not belong to you. Not because you've been tricked, but because you've built a story that works. And once you own that story, it feels just as real as anything you've ever lived. You're walking into a stressful meeting. Your stomach is tight, your thoughts are scattered, and everything feels personal. You tell yourself, "I've got this," but it doesn't help much. Now imagine saying, "You've got this, Sarah," or whatever your name is. It sounds odd. It feels like something only an actor or a child might do. But research shows it works. Talking to yourself in the third person can make you think more clearly, handle stress better, and make decisions with less bias. The shift is small, just changing "I" to your name. But it changes how your brain processes the moment. This is called self-distancing. When you refer to yourself as you or by name, your mind treats the situation more like an observer than a participant. It stops feeling like everything is happening to you and starts feeling like something you're seeing. That change reduces emotional reactivity. You still care, but you're less likely to spiral. You gain just enough space to think before you act. Researchers have tested this effect in emotional situations. In one study, participants were asked to recall a painful memory. Some did it using first-person language. "Why did I feel that way?" Others used third person. "Why did Alex feel that way?" The people who used their own name felt less overwhelmed. They processed the event more calmly and made fewer sweeping statements like, "I'm always like this," or "I'll never change." The small shift in language made a big difference in how they thought. You see the same effect during high-pressure tasks. In another experiment, participants had to give a public speech. Some were told to coach themselves using "I" language. Others were told to use their name. Those who used their name spoke more confidently, felt less anxious, and performed better. Talking to themselves like an outsider helped them behave more like one. Cool, focused, and clear. The shift works even when no one else hears it. You don't need to say it aloud. Just thinking, "What should Maria do?" instead of "What should I do?" can be enough. The effect comes from how your brain responds to the language, not from how you say it. It sounds simple, but most people don't do it. It feels awkward. The reason has to do with the ego, the sense of a fixed self inside your mind. You believe you are your thoughts. So when you say, "I'm scared," it feels like a report from deep inside. Switching to third person feels fake. It breaks the illusion that your thoughts are private signals from your true self. But that illusion isn't accurate. The self isn't a fixed, solid thing. It's a process, your brain updating its model of you from moment to moment. By talking to yourself in the third person, you interrupt that loop. You remind the brain that this self is something it's managing, not something it needs to obey blindly. That distance makes room for better choices. You can see the effect more clearly when watching someone else. A friend says, "I can't believe I messed that up. I'm such an idiot." You wouldn't say, "Yeah, probably." You'd say something like, "You're being too hard on yourself." One mistake doesn't define you. You know how to help because you're not tangled in their emotions. You can think clearly for them. Self-distancing gives you a version of that same perspective, but for your own mind. It helps with moral decisions too. When people face ethical dilemmas, they often make better choices for others than they do for themselves. When the question is, "What should I do?" they think about risk, blame, and emotion. But when the question is, "What should Sarah do?" the answer tends to be more principled. The shift reduces the weight of self-interest. It invites values into the room. Even children can use self-distancing. In one study, researchers gave young kids a frustrating task and told them to pretend they were someone else, like Batman or Dora the Explorer. The kids who took on the third-person role stuck with the task longer and stayed calmer. They acted less like upset children and more like focused helpers. The distance helped them stay on track. Adults are no different. The method works across age groups. It's not about the name, it's about the space it creates. The feeling of weirdness is part of what makes the illusion powerful. Your ego resists the move. It says, "That's not how people talk," but that's the illusion talking. The real question is, does it help? And the answer is yes. It slows you down just enough to pause, reflect, and redirect. It stops the rush of emotional reaction and gives the thinking brain time to catch up. You don't need to do it all the time. It works best in moments of stress, conflict, or choice. When your emotions start to run the show, step back. Say your name. Frame the question like you're coaching a friend. What should Anna do? What would be best for Jordan? This turns down the volume on panic and turns up the volume on reason. You can also use it when making decisions. Should you take the job? Should you end the relationship? The problem with first-person thinking is that it pulls in too much noise, fear, habit, guilt. When you switch to third person, you make space for what actually matters. What kind of life does Jason want? What does this choice mean for future Maya? That simple shift can stop you from repeating patterns you already regret. The practice works with written reflection too. If you journal, try writing about your day using your name instead of I. Instead of "I felt tired and unmotivated," write, "Laura felt tired today. She had a hard time focusing." It may sound strange at first, but it will help you notice patterns and give better advice to yourself. Self-distancing isn't a trick to fake confidence. It's a tool to reduce noise. It turns off the spotlight. It lets you look at the situation with more clarity and less fear. Your brain responds to language more than you realize. It uses names and pronouns to sort what belongs to you and what doesn't. When you talk to yourself like you're someone else, the brain listens differently. The illusion is that your voice in your head is the real you. But the voice can change. You can shape it. You can speak to yourself with more space, more grace, and more calm. It starts with a small shift. Just say your name. Ask a better question. Give advice the way you would to someone you care about. Then follow it. Not because it feels normal, but because it works. You read a sentence like, "The road runs through the forest," and you understand it instantly. You don't picture the road with legs, actually running. But your brain still reacts to the word runs as if there's motion. That reaction isn't a mistake. It's part of how your brain handles language. Even when the meaning is metaphorical, your brain often processes it as if it were literal. This happens because language and movement share pathways in the brain. When you read words linked to action, like grasp, kick, or run, your motor system responds. It doesn't wait to check if the sentence is literal. It reacts to the verb first, then it adjusts for context. So when the road runs, your brain first processes the action, then fits that motion into the image of a path stretching forward through trees. Researchers have shown this using brain scans. When people read action words, regions involved in physical movement become active. If the word is grasp, the part of the brain involved in hand movement lights up. If the word is kick, leg-related areas respond. This happens even when the action isn't something you're doing, and even when it's not meant to be taken literally. This process helps with understanding. By simulating the action, the brain creates a richer sense of the sentence. That simulation gives you a sense of shape, direction, or tension. In the case of "the road runs," you feel the motion of the road. You imagine it stretching or cutting through the forest. That mental movement helps you visualize the scene more clearly. Metaphors often rely on this kind of mapping. You say, "She fell into a deep depression," and your brain responds to fall and deep in ways linked to space and movement. You know she didn't physically fall, but the feeling of sinking helps you grasp the weight of the emotion. The metaphor activates systems linked to movement, depth, and pressure. It makes an abstract experience feel grounded. Another common phrase is "time flies." You don't picture wings on a clock, but the word "flies" creates a sense of speed and movement. You feel time passing quickly. The metaphor borrows from physical experience to describe something invisible. Your brain uses past motion experiences to build a clear sense of what the sentence means. This use of action to understand language starts early. Children learning language often act out what they hear. If you say "jump," they jump. That link between words and action helps them learn meaning. Over time, they internalize that response. Even as adults, you still react to language physically, though it happens inside the brain instead of through movement. The overlap between motion and language doesn't stop at reading. It affects how you speak and write too. When you describe a memory, you might say, "It keeps coming back," or "I moved past it." These are physical phrases, but they describe thoughts or emotions. You use movement to make sense of mental life. That's not just habit, it's how your brain organizes complex ideas. It maps them onto what you already know through your body. When someone says she carried the team, you don't think she literally lifted anyone, but the image of carrying helps explain the effort. It's a metaphor that pulls from the body's sense of strain, weight, and support. Your brain can feel the meaning because it once felt something like it in real life. This kind of metaphor shows up in science, art, politics, and daily talk. A business takes off. An idea gains traction. A country falls behind. All of these use motion to explain change. Your brain responds because it's built to understand movement. The more physical the image, the easier it is to grasp. Researchers call this embodied cognition. It means the mind doesn't run on symbols alone. It uses the body's systems, motion, perception, emotion, to build meaning. Even abstract thoughts depend on experience. When you read, "He leapt at the chance," your brain doesn't just decode the grammar, it simulates the leap. That simulation gives the sentence energy and urgency. The effect is stronger when the metaphor is tied to real experience. The argument spiraled out of control. Works because you've seen spirals and felt things get worse in steps. You don't need to analyze the phrase. Your brain pulls from past sensory patterns. That makes the metaphor easier to follow than a technical explanation. Some metaphors become so familiar that you stop noticing them. He's on top of the situation, or she has a heavy workload, sound ordinary, but they still trigger subtle physical responses. Your brain still feels the height or the weight, even if just for a second. These traces of motion make the ideas more concrete. The connection between language and motion helps explain why stories feel so real. When you read a novel and the character climbs a hill, your brain simulates climbing. When the character races to catch a train, your heart may race too. The more vivid the language, the more your brain joins in. It simulates the motion, and that simulation deepens your focus. This overlap even affects memory. If you read a sentence with strong action, you're more likely to remember it later. The physical element gives the sentence more grip. It sticks in your mind, not just as words, but as a felt event. That's one reason good writing often uses motion, even when the topic is abstract. Not all metaphors use movement. Some use color, size, sound, or balance, but motion is one of the most powerful. Your body knows it deeply. You've spent your whole life moving, walking, falling, reaching, pausing. When language taps into that memory, understanding becomes faster and richer. You may not notice this process. It happens fast, but it shapes how you read, think, and speak. Motion is more than physical. It's mental structure. So when the road runs through the forest, your brain feels that motion, even though you know roads don't run. The metaphor works because your brain doesn't draw a hard line between body and mind. It understands the sentence, not just through logic, but through motion, remembered and reimagined. You walk into a movie theater and see 3 options at the snack counter. A small popcorn costs $4. A large popcorn costs $7. Right between them is a medium popcorn for $6. You weren't planning to buy popcorn, but now the large seems like a deal. It's just $1 more than the medium and much bigger. You buy it without thinking much. That third option, the medium, was never meant to sell. It was meant to push you toward the large. This is the decoy effect. The decoy effect works by changing how you compare options. It doesn't change what you want. It changes what looks better in the moment. You might not have a clear preference between 2 choices, but when a third, worse option is added, one of the original 2 starts to look more appealing. The decoy is not there to be chosen. It's there to make another choice look like the obvious winner. This effect has been tested in many settings. In one study, people were asked to choose between 2 vacation packages. One had a 4-star hotel with average food. The other had a 3-star hotel with excellent food. People were split. But when a third option was added, a 4-star hotel with poor food, most people chose the 4-star with average food. The new, worse option made it easier to favor the better 4-star hotel. The decoy didn't need to be popular. It just had to tilt the comparison. The effect works because people don't make decisions in isolation. They rely on contrast. When you look at a menu or a product list, you don't evaluate each item on its own. You compare one to another. Your brain wants to find which one is better, not whether one meets your needs. That makes you vulnerable to changes in the set of options. Imagine shopping for a new phone. You see 2 models. One has a better camera, the other has a longer battery life. You're torn. Then you see a third model with a worse camera and average battery life. Suddenly, the phone with the better camera seems like a better deal. You didn't change your priorities. You just responded to the new comparison. The key to the decoy effect is that the third option must be clearly worse than one choice and not clearly better than the other. It has to be dominated in a way that favors one of the original 2. If the decoy were better than both, people would choose it. If it were worse than both, it might be ignored. But when it's close enough to one option, just slightly worse, it highlights that option's strengths. This effect shows how unstable preferences can be. People often believe they know what they want, but many decisions are not based on fixed values. They're based on relative judgment. When the frame changes, so does the outcome. You might think you prefer price over quality, but that can flip if the right decoy makes quality look like the smarter trade. Companies use the decoy effect in pricing strategies. A software company might offer a basic plan for $20, a premium plan for $50, and a plus plan for $45. The plus plan has fewer features than premium, but more than basic. It exists to make the premium plan look better. You're not expected to choose plus. You're expected to feel smart for skipping it and going premium. The decoy effect also shows up in politics. A weak third-party candidate can pull attention toward one of the major candidates by making them look stronger by comparison. The same happens in hiring. If a manager interviews two strong candidates and one clearly weaker one, the stronger of the two may seem even better. The weak candidate adds contrast, not value. In daily life, this plays out in small decisions. You're looking at apartments. One is large but far from work. One is small but close. A third is small and far. You weren't sure before, but now the small, close option seems better. The third apartment made no sense on its own, but it shaped how you saw the others. It nudged you. This illusion affects how people feel after a decision, too. If you choose the better option in a set with a clear decoy, you feel more confident. The contrast makes you feel like you avoided a trap. You believe you picked wisely, even though your decision was influenced by the presence of an option that didn't matter. The effect works even when people are warned. In one experiment, participants were told about the decoy strategy and asked to be on guard. Most still showed the same patterns in choice. Knowing the trick doesn't always stop it. The comparisons still shape perception, even when people try to think clearly. One reason the effect is hard to fight is because it works quickly. The brain is fast at making relative judgments. It doesn't pause to weigh each option in depth. It reacts to contrast. It wants to make sense of the set, not assess every detail in isolation. That speed helps in most situations, but it also makes you easy to steer. This doesn't mean every decision you make is manipulated. Sometimes the best option really is the best. But when you notice a set of choices where one option seems oddly out of place, too bad, too close, or too specific, it's worth asking what role that option plays. Is it really there to be chosen, or is it a decoy? Even well-meaning people can fall into using decoys. A friend might suggest 3 movies for the group to pick from, but one of them is an obvious outlier. It makes the other 2 look more appealing. A parent might offer choices to a child, but one is clearly the wrong one. The goal isn't manipulation, but control. It's still a form of framing. The decoy effect highlights a simple truth about human thinking. Most choices are comparisons, not evaluations. You don't ask what's best in the world. You ask what's better than the other thing. That works well when options are simple and direct. But when the set includes a decoy, you may feel certain without knowing your certainty was shaped by something you never would have picked in the first place. You stay up late, watching another episode even though you have work in the morning. You eat the cookie even though you told yourself you'd cut back on sugar. You buy the expensive shoes even though you're saving for something else. In each case, the short-term reward wins. You don't plan it, you just do it. Then later, you regret it. That cycle repeats. You know what you want in the long run, but you keep choosing what feels good right now. This is hyperbolic discounting. Hyperbolic discounting means your brain values rewards based on how soon they arrive. A reward now feels more important than a bigger reward later. That part makes sense. Most people prefer a reward today over one next year. but the way the brain handles the trade-off is uneven. The closer a reward is, the more power it has. A $5 bill in your hand feels more real than a $20 bill next week. When time is short, the brain changes its priorities. This effect has been tested many times. People are asked to choose between getting $50 today or $100 in a year. Many take the $50, but when asked to choose between $50 in 9 years or $100 in 10, most people choose the $100. The reward and delay are the same in both examples. $50 extra for one more year of waiting, but people make different choices depending on when the rewards start. The moment the delay becomes immediate, the value shifts. That's what makes this illusion powerful. You plan based on long-term goals, but when the moment of choice comes, your brain rewrites the value. You believe you're being rational, but your sense of what matters has been distorted by time. What you want now always feels more important than what you wanted before. The reward hasn't changed, the distance has. This shows up in habits. You might decide on Sunday that you'll go to the gym every morning, but when Monday morning comes, the bed feels warm and the workout feels far away. You skip it and promise to start Tuesday. On Tuesday, the same thing happens. The benefit of exercise is distant. The comfort of the blanket is right here. That's enough to tip the scale. You're not being lazy or undisciplined. You're reacting to how the brain weighs value across time. When rewards are far away, the brain uses slower, more logical systems. When they're close, it uses faster, more emotional systems. The closer the reward, the more your emotional brain takes over. That's why you can make good plans and still break them. You weren't lying to yourself when you made the plan. You just entered a different mental state when the decision became real. Hyperbolic discounting isn't the same as short-term thinking. It's a curve, not a line. The value of a reward doesn't just fall with time. It drops sharply when the delay is short, then levels out. That's why people prefer $10 today over $11 tomorrow, but will wait an extra day to get $11 if both options are a month away. The brain discounts future value at a rate that depends on how close the reward is. This illusion also affects how people manage money. You might want to save for retirement, but end up spending on things that bring quicker satisfaction. A new phone, a weekend trip, or dinner out feels more rewarding than adding to a long-term account. You still care about the future, you just don't feel it as strongly. The long-term benefit doesn't push as hard. Marketers use this to their advantage. They frame offers with immediate rewards. Get it today, limited time, instant access. They know that urgency makes rewards feel bigger. Even if the offer isn't a great deal, the nearness makes it hard to resist. Your brain feels like it would lose something by waiting, even if waiting leads to more. You also see this effect in health decisions. A person who smokes may want to quit. They understand the risks, but the relief or pleasure of a cigarette right now outweighs the benefit of lower health risks years from now. The future cost is real, but it doesn't feel urgent. The brain chooses based on the size of the emotion, not the size of the outcome. This gap between present and future self creates tension. People often describe feeling like two different people, one who makes plans and one who breaks them. The planner sets goals, tracks progress, and wants change. The breaker makes the decisions in real time and often chooses differently. They share the same body, but not the same perspective. Each lives in a different moment. There are ways to reduce the effect. One is pre-commitment. You decide in advance and lock yourself in. Automatic savings plans work this way. You never hold the money in your hands, so you never feel the pull to spend it. Some people use apps that block distractions for a set time, or programs that charge a fee if they skip a goal. These tools remove the choice from the heat of the moment. Another strategy is to bring the future closer. If the benefit of your actions feels vague or distant, make it more vivid. Instead of saying, "I'll feel better if I work out," imagine walking out of the gym feeling clear and focused. Picture your future self enjoying the results. The more concrete the future becomes, the easier it is to respect. People also use framing tricks. They break big goals into short-term wins. Instead of saving for a distant number, they focus on reaching the next $100. Instead of losing 20 pounds, they aim for a consistent morning walk. These shifts reduce the time gap between action and reward. When the delay shrinks, the value rises. That's how you turn long-term goals into something the brain can respond to now. The illusion isn't a flaw in logic. It's an old survival system. In the past, it made sense to favor short-term rewards. Food now was better than food later. Shelter tonight mattered more than safety next month. The system helped people survive, but in a world built around long-term outcomes, it works against you. The things that matter most, health, money, relationships, learning, take time. You can't feel the full reward when you make the choice. That makes it easy to slip. Hyperbolic discounting doesn't stop you from setting goals. It stops you from keeping them when the reward is far away. The trick is not to fight the brain, but to work with it. Make the future more vivid. Set traps that protect your past decisions. Change the structure, not just the mindset. Your present self will always want more now. But with the right frame, you can make sure that wanting doesn't win every time. You walk into a grocery store to buy a jar of peanut butter. You expect a quick decision, but when you reach the aisle, there are over 20 kinds. Crunchy, smooth, natural, unsalted, low-fat, organic, honey-roasted. Some are from brands you've never heard of. Others have labels packed with small print. You start reading. You compare ingredients and prices. You hesitate. After 10 minutes, you pick one, but you're not sure it was the right one. At home, it tastes fine, but you don't feel satisfied. You wonder if one of the others would have been better. This is the choice illusion. People often think more choice means more freedom, and freedom feels good. But when options increase past a certain point, your brain doesn't feel more free, it feels more burdened. With every added choice, you gain more responsibility for the outcome. If you choose badly, there's no one to blame. You had the power, you had the information, you had all those options. That freedom becomes pressure. Researchers have studied this. In one study, a group of people saw a table with 6 kinds of jam. Another group saw a table with 24. More people stopped at the larger display, but fewer of them actually bought anything. The ones with fewer options were more likely to make a choice and were more satisfied with their decision. The larger set drew attention, but made it harder to act. Too many options can cause you to freeze. The problem isn't the presence of options, it's the strain of comparison. When you choose between 2 or 3 things, you can hold them all in mind. You can weigh the pros and cons without much effort. But as the list grows, you start comparing things that are hard to measure. Is organic more important than price? Is brand loyalty worth less salt? Does the glass jar matter more than the plastic one? The decision becomes work. This shows up in daily life. You scroll through dozens of movies on a streaming service. After 10 minutes, nothing feels right. You settle on something, half watch it, and feel like you wasted your time. Part of the problem is that the act of choosing became tiring. You used up your focus before the movie even started. By the time you hit play, you are already disappointed. The choice illusion also affects satisfaction. When you have many options, each one you didn't pick lingers in your mind. If the outcome isn't perfect, you wonder if one of the others would have been better. This is called opportunity cost, the value of the options you gave up. When you have few options, opportunity cost feels low. When you have many, it feels high. Even if your choice was good, the alternatives create doubt. Think about buying a shirt. You go to a store with 2 options. You pick one, and it fits well. You're happy with it. Now imagine a store with 50 shirts. You try on 5. You find one that fits even better than the one from the first store. But now, you wonder about the ones you didn't try. You leave with the better shirt and more regret. The larger set increased the quality of your choice, but decreased your satisfaction. The illusion gets stronger when choices are similar. If one option clearly beats the others, more choice doesn't hurt. But when each one has strengths and trade-offs, your brain has to do more work to find a reason. If the reasons are balanced, you may keep switching between them. That can lead to analysis paralysis, when you stop choosing altogether because the decision feels impossible. Even simple tasks get harder with too much choice. You go to a cafe for a coffee. The menu lists over 30 drinks, with options for size, milk, sweetness, and extras. You spend more time ordering than drinking. You may enjoy the drink, but it came with extra effort. If the cafe had only 3 choices, you might have picked faster and left more satisfied. This illusion doesn't mean choice is bad. Having options is often better than not having them, but the way options are presented matters. A few good choices lead to clear decisions. Too many similar choices create mental clutter. The more time you spend comparing, the less energy you have left to enjoy the outcome. You also feel more responsible for disappointment when you have more control. If a restaurant only has one dessert and you don't like it, you shrug. It wasn't up to you. If they have 10 and you choose one that's just okay, you blame yourself. The larger set shifts the burden from the world to you. Online shopping makes the effect worse. You can sort by price, rating, brand, material, and hundreds of other filters. You can read reviews, compare photos, and watch videos. This gives the illusion that there's a perfect option, but the more time you spend searching, the more you expect from the result. If it falls short, the disappointment feels deeper. You think, with all that information, I should have chosen better. Dating apps create the same trap. Swiping through hundreds of profiles feels like control, but it can reduce how much value you place on each person. With so many options, it becomes easier to reject quickly, hesitate to commit, and feel unsure even after matching. More choice makes you think you'll find exactly what you want, but it often leads to less follow-through and less satisfaction. Even big life decisions are shaped by this illusion. Careers, places to live, paths to follow. Modern life offers more of these than ever. But the same pattern holds. When people face too many life options, they often delay decisions, second-guess themselves, or try to keep all paths open. The result is more stress and less progress. Freedom becomes weight. Some people cope by lowering expectations. They choose quickly and don't look back. Others try to gather every possible fact, but too much research can backfire. The goal isn't to make the perfect choice, it's to make a good one, act on it, and move forward. Satisfaction comes less from the option itself and more from the commitment to it. The choice illusion comes from believing that freedom means having as many options as possible. But real freedom comes from clarity. When you know what matters, you don't need 20 choices. You need one that fits. The illusion is that more is always better. But when the brain is forced to juggle too much, it doesn't feel free. It feels trapped. You read a sentence that says, people prefer warmer colors because of how their visual cortex processes thermal input. It sounds smart. It mentions the brain. It uses terms like visual cortex and thermal input. You nod, maybe even repeat it to someone later. But when you stop to think about it, it doesn't actually say much. It offers no real evidence, no testable claim, and no new insight. The sentence feels more credible than it deserves. That's the Neurobabble illusion. Neurobabble is the use of scientific-sounding language, especially brain terms, to make a statement seem more valid or intelligent. People often trust explanations more when they contain references to the brain. Even when those references don't add anything, the terms don't have to be wrong. They just don't have to help. They can be filler that gives the illusion of depth. Researchers have tested this. In one study, people read short explanations of psychological findings. Some of the explanations included irrelevant neuroscience terms like brain scans show activity in the frontal lobe. These additions didn't change the actual claim. They added no support or reasoning. But people rated the explanations as more satisfying and scientific when they included the brain language. Even experts were sometimes fooled. The illusion works because people tend to see the brain as the ultimate source of truth. If a claim can be tied to a brain region or a neural process, it seems grounded. It sounds like science. But the brain is part of everything we do. Saying that a person feels anxious because of neural activity in emotion processing regions is like saying a car moves because of mechanical motion in propulsion systems. It's true, but it doesn't explain much. The problem isn't just about language. It's about trust. When people hear brain terms, they lower their guard. They assume the speaker knows what they're talking about. They don't question the logic. This can lead to the spread of weak ideas wrapped in impressive words. The terms act like a mask. They distract from the lack of substance. Neurobabble often shows up in marketing. A product might claim to stimulate cognitive centers through targeted neural feedback. That sounds precise, but what does it mean? Which centers? What kind of stimulation? Is there proof that the product does anything at all? The brain terms give the illusion of evidence without providing any. They make the message harder to argue with, not because it's stronger, but because it's foggier. The same thing happens in wellness advice. A supplement might say it supports neurotransmitter balance or enhances synaptic plasticity. These phrases suggest a scientific basis, but often they are just pulled from general knowledge about how the brain works. They sound impressive, but don't show how the product achieves the claimed result. Even in education, neurobabble can sneak in. A school program might say it engages both hemispheres of the brain or uses brain-based strategies. These claims may be true in a loose sense, but without specifics, they're empty. They borrow the authority of neuroscience without showing how it applies. This doesn't mean brain science is fake or unhelpful. Neuroscience has made real progress in understanding memory, attention, emotion, and behavior. The problem is not with the science. It's with how the terms are used outside the lab. When people use brain language to sound smart instead of to explain, the meaning gets lost. The illusion works in part because most people don't have deep knowledge of the brain. They recognize terms like prefrontal cortex or dopamine and assume those terms are used correctly. But knowing a word doesn't mean you understand its function. A sentence that says dopamine is released when you check your phone may be true in some cases, but that doesn't mean dopamine explains all habits or that your phone has hijacked your brain. The term becomes a shortcut to make a big claim without doing the work. People also like concrete details. Brain terms give a sense of precision, even when the rest of the sentence is vague. Saying stress affects decision-making sounds soft. Saying stress impairs prefrontal cortex function during choice processing sounds sharper. But if the second version doesn't add evidence or clarify a mechanism, it may just be dressing. In some cases, neurobabble is unintentional. A writer may add brain terms to show that they've read the research. They want to sound informed. They want their argument to carry weight. But if they can't explain what the term means or why it matters, it becomes filler. A good test is to remove the brain language and see if the point still holds. If it does, the brain terms weren't needed. If it doesn't, the argument wasn't strong to begin with. The illusion also affects how people judge others. Someone who says this behavior is linked to frontal lobe function may be taken more seriously than someone who says this behavior is linked to habit and reward. The first sounds more medical, more precise, more neutral, but it may not say anything new. It just shifts the explanation from psychology to anatomy without adding insight. The media often reinforces this. Headlines say things like, "Scientists find the brain's love center," or "Fear lives in the amygdala." These lines sound neat and final, but the real science is more complex. Brain regions do many things. Emotions, thoughts, and actions don't live in one place. They come from patterns across systems. The oversimplified terms help sell the story, but they create false confidence in how much we know. To avoid the illusion, it helps to ask simple questions. What does this brain term mean? How does it support the claim? Could the same point be made without it? What evidence is missing? You don't need to be an expert. You just need to stay alert to when science is used as a shield instead of a tool. Neurobabble is a kind of costume. It dresses up ideas to make them look more official. But real understanding doesn't come from the number of brain words in a sentence. It comes from clarity, logic, and evidence. When language makes an idea harder to test or explain, it doesn't help, it hides. The brain is not a magic word, it's a complex system. Using it to explain everything doesn't make the explanation smarter. It makes it harder to check. And when you stop checking, you stop thinking. The illusion feels smart, but the thinking stops where the buzzwords begin. You think you know who you are. You might describe yourself as outgoing, quiet, thoughtful, bold, or independent. You carry these traits like a map. You use them to explain your actions, your choices, and your place in the world. But personality isn't as fixed as it feels. It shifts, it adapts, and one of the strongest forces shaping it is culture. You're not the same you in every place. This is the cultural mind illusion. Your brain doesn't develop in a vacuum. It grows inside a language, a family, a society. The values around you shape what you notice, what you ignore, and how you explain your behavior. In Western cultures, like the United States, Canada, or parts of Europe, people often see themselves as independent. They focus on personal goals, personal traits, and personal success. In Eastern cultures, like Japan, China, or Korea, people often see themselves as part of a group. They focus on roles, duties, and social harmony. These aren't just ideas. They shape how you think, feel, and even remember. Researchers have tested this across borders. In one study, people from the US and Japan were asked to write 20 I am statements. Americans tended to write traits. I am smart, I am creative, I am ambitious. Japanese participants wrote roles and relationships. I am a daughter, I am part of my company, I am a friend to my classmate. Each group was being honest, but each was looking at the self through a different lens. These lenses go deeper than words. They shape perception. In visual tests, Western participants often focus on central objects, a fish in a tank, a face in a crowd. Eastern participants pay more attention to context, the water around the fish, the background faces. It's not that one group is better at seeing, it's that their culture teaches them what to look for. The mind learns what matters. Memory also changes. People in Western cultures tend to recall personal events with themselves at the center. What they did, what they felt, what they chose. People in Eastern cultures are more likely to remember how the event affected others, how people reacted, or how they fit into the group. The same birthday party becomes two different stories, shaped by different models of the self. This isn't about biology. It's not about genes. It's about experience. In fact, you can watch the shift happen. In one experiment, bilingual people from Hong Kong were given the same personality survey, once in English, once in Chinese. When the survey was in English, they gave more individualistic answers. When it was in Chinese, they leaned more toward group-based responses. The language itself cued a different cultural frame. It wasn't fake, it was flexible. People often carry more than one cultural frame. Someone raised in a Korean household in Los Angeles may think one way at home and another at school. In Korean, they may speak more softly, defer to elders, and avoid self-praise. In English, they may speak more directly, assert themselves, and highlight achievements. Both versions feel real. Neither one is pretending. The switch happens naturally, without planning. This isn't the same as code switching, which is often about safety or acceptance in the face of power differences. Cultural frame shifting happens even when no one is watching. It's not about trying to fit in. It's about how the mind adapts to the signals around it. You might act one way in Tokyo and another way in Toronto, and believe you're the same person in both places. The illusion is thinking there's only one version of you, the real one. But your mind holds many possible selves. Each setting draws out a different one. You might feel more curious in one language, more blunt in another, more patient with your parents, more outspoken with friends. Culture doesn't erase personality, but it guides how it shows up. You also carry the cultural lens into how you judge others. In Western cultures, if someone fails, people often look at traits. They say, he's lazy or she's careless. In Eastern cultures, people are more likely to look at the situation. They ask, was she tired, or was the task unclear? These aren't excuses. They reflect a deeper assumption that behavior depends more on context than on fixed traits. This difference affects praise too. In the West, people are often told to believe in yourself and follow your passion. In the East, people may hear, don't stand out, or think of the group. These messages don't just change behavior, they change how people explain success. In the West, someone might say, I worked hard. In the East, someone might say, my team helped me. Each version feels right within its frame. The illusion also shows up in therapy, education, and business. A Western therapist might focus on self-esteem and boundaries. An Eastern client might be more concerned with obligation and shame. If the therapist doesn't understand the frame, the advice may fall flat. In school, Western systems reward speaking up. Eastern systems may reward listening and discipline. Neither one is better on its own. But when one is applied to the other without care, it can feel wrong or unfair. Even ideas of happiness shift. In the West, happiness often means feeling good, joy, pride, excitement. In the East, happiness may mean feeling right, balance, peace, belonging. You might seek different goals depending on the culture shaping your values. You might even define a good life in different terms. This isn't about stereotypes. Not every American is independent. Not every Chinese person is group-oriented. But on average, culture nudges the mind. It shapes the habits of thought. And those habits shape what feels natural, even when you're not aware of it. If you've lived in more than one culture, you've likely felt this. You land in a new country and realize that your usual way of thinking doesn't quite fit. You feel louder or quieter than everyone else. You notice that your humor doesn't land. Over time, you adjust, not by changing who you are, but by shifting how you think and respond. The self stretches. Culture doesn't just teach you what to do, it teaches you how to think about yourself. And that thinking guides your choices. You believe you're being you, but the version that shows up depends on the frame you're in. You're not being fake, you're being shaped. The illusion is that the self is a single, fixed point, but the mind isn't built that way. It bends. It shifts between roles and settings. The you that acts in a group meeting may not match the you that reflects alone. The difference is not weakness, it's flexibility. The same mind under different lights shows different patterns. What you call personality is partly memory, partly habit, and partly culture, woven together in ways you rarely notice. You leave dishes in the sink and say you'll wash them tomorrow. You spend money you told yourself you'd save. You eat the extra slice of cake even though you plan to cut back. You promise to start the project next week, to quit the habit next month, to fix your routine someday. You push the work to someone else, your future self. That version of you always seems more disciplined, more patient, more in control. But the truth is simple. Your future self is just you later. And that version will be no more willing, focused, or organized than you are now. This is the future self delusion. The mind treats the future as separate from the present. When people imagine their future selves, they often picture someone who has grown, changed, improved. This version has better habits, stronger willpower, more time. But that vision is a guess, not a plan. And it often works more like avoidance than optimism. You hand problems off to someone who doesn't exist yet, hoping they'll care more than you do. This illusion has been studied. Researchers ask people to think about themselves in the future, a year from now, 10 years from now. Brain scans show that people activate different regions when they think about their future selves than when they think about their current selves. The brain reacts almost the same way it does when thinking about strangers. This mental distance helps explain why it feels so easy to make promises and break them later. You don't feel the cost now. You imagine someone else carrying it. Think about retirement savings. People know they should save. They understand the math, but many still delay. The reward feels far away. The sacrifice feels immediate. The same happens with health. You say you'll eat better next month. You believe it. You even make a plan. But when the moment comes, your present self still wants what's easy. Your future self, now your present, makes the same excuses. Procrastination works the same way. A student may put off studying because it's unpleasant now. They imagine doing it tomorrow, fresh and focused. But tomorrow, the task still feels unpleasant. The cycle continues. The brain acts as if the pain belongs to someone else, a future version who will be stronger. But that person doesn't show up. Just you again. This mental trick has a cost. It creates a pattern of delay, not just in tasks, but in self-respect. You think the real version of you is the one in the future, the one who will finally change. So you forgive the current version over and over. But each time you delay, the weight shifts forward. Deadlines stack up, health declines, debt grows. You're not escaping the cost, you're handing it off to yourself. You can see this in simple choices. Imagine two rewards. One is $20 today. The other is $30 in a month. Many people take the $20. But if the choice is between $20 in 6 months and $30 in 7 months, most choose the $30. The delay is the same, 1 month, but the timing changes everything. When the choice involves your present self, the smaller reward feels stronger. When both rewards are in the future, you're more patient. The closer the choice is to now, the less you value the future. This is called temporal discounting. The illusion also affects how people set goals. You buy books and never read them. You sign up for the gym and don't go. You assume your future self will have more energy, more interest. But energy doesn't build on its own. It comes from habits. If you never start, your future self will be just as stuck. People make sharper decisions when they see the future self as connected to who they are now. In one experiment, participants saw age-progressed photos of themselves. Those who saw their older faces were more likely to save money. They felt a stronger bond with the person they would become. They saw that person not as a stranger, but as themselves, carrying the result of today's actions. You don't need technology to build that bond. You can practice it. Picture your future self doing something you enjoy. Now, imagine them cleaning up after your mess, stressed and tired. Imagine them looking back at today, wishing you'd made a different choice. The clearer you make that version of you, the harder it becomes to ignore them. You can also talk to your future self, not in an abstract way, but in a note or a recording. Ask them how they feel. Ask what they wish you had done. Make it harder to forget that they exist. Treat them with the respect you would offer a close friend, because that's what they are. The only person guaranteed to live with your choices. When people face serious health scares, they often say the same thing. I wish I had paid attention sooner. At that point, the future self has become the present, and there is no more delay to lean on. The cost arrives, the debt is due, the time is gone. This illusion isn't a sign of weakness. It's a side effect of how the brain handles time. The future is blurry, the present is loud. Pain now feels sharper than pain later. Pleasure now feels stronger than later gain. But you don't have to let the pattern run you. The trick is to shorten the distance. Make the future self more visible, more real. One way is to set up systems that remove the need for future willpower. Automate savings, prep meals in advance, block apps that steal your time. Make bad choices harder and good choices easier. Don't leave it to your future self. Protect them. Another way is to shift how you talk to yourself. Don't say, I'll do it later. Say, if I don't do it now, I'm asking someone else, who is still me, to do it under worse conditions. Make the trade clear. Make the cost obvious. The future self-delusion fades when you stop believing in a version of yourself who will be perfect just because time has passed. Growth doesn't come from waiting. It comes from what you do now, before you feel ready, before the excuses start, before the moment is gone again. The person you will be is shaped by what you choose to do today. Not later, not someday, just now. You hear that a company went bankrupt, and you nod. You say the signs were there. Poor leadership, too much debt, a changing market, or maybe a couple gets divorced after 20 years. You say they were never a good match. You think back to the way they argued or the things they said at dinner. It all makes sense now. But that's the trick. You didn't know it would end this way. It only looks clear after the fact. That's the hindsight illusion. Once something happens, the brain reshapes the story. It fills in the gaps. It smooths out the edges. The mess of real life becomes a straight line pointing to one outcome. You feel like you always knew it would happen, or at least that it makes sense in retrospect. But that feeling isn't memory. It's reconstruction. You didn't know. You're just seeing it through a new lens, one that only exists because the outcome is now certain. This illusion is common in courtrooms, news stories, sports, history books, and even personal decisions. After a major event, people often believe they predicted it, or they believe someone should have. If a system failed, someone must have missed the warning signs. If a person succeeded, the clues must have been obvious. People search backward for causes and treat them as signs that the outcome was inevitable. But most of those clues only seem meaningful because you already know what happened. The illusion distorts learning. If you think the result was bound to happen, you stop asking what else could have happened. You stop looking at the decisions made under uncertainty. You forget how little you knew at the time. This makes you less prepared for the future. You start to believe you understand more than you do. Researchers have tested this by showing people short stories about complex situations, stock markets, war games, medical cases. After learning how the story ends, participants judge the outcome as more predictable and less surprising. They say the signs were clear. They believe the result was more likely. Even when they're told that others made different predictions, they think those predictions were poor. They judge the story with the knowledge of the ending. But that's not how decisions are made in real life. Real life is full of incomplete information. People act with limited time, unclear goals, and noisy data. A company launches a product, and it fails. Was the idea bad? Was the market not ready? Was the timing off? Any of those reasons might fit. But after failure, the brain focuses on the one that makes the most sense in reverse. It feels true because it's easy to explain, but it might not be the real cause. You just notice it now because of what followed. Hindsight also reshapes memory. You think you knew something all along, but your earlier thoughts were different. You forget your past doubts. You forget the risk. You forget the alternatives you once considered. You revise your memory to match what actually happened. That revision helps you feel smart, stable, and consistent. But it keeps you from seeing how you change. It blocks growth. This illusion shows up in personal life too. You look back on a breakup and say, it was never going to work. But during the relationship, you had hope. You had reasons to stay. You chose it for a reason. Saying it was always doomed erases those reasons. It flattens the complexity. It also makes you less likely to notice what you did learn, what signs were actually meaningful, and which were noise. The same pattern holds for good outcomes. You get a job and you say, I nailed that interview. But maybe it was close. Maybe they flipped a coin. Maybe they liked your resume more than your answers. You pass a test and forget how uncertain you felt. You assume your success proves your skill. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just proves you got lucky. The illusion makes it hard to tell. Leaders often fall into this trap. A project goes well, and they believe their plan was solid. A project fails, and they blame the one factor that stands out after the fact. They forget the pressure, the limits, and the lack of clarity they had at the time. This makes them overconfident in future decisions. They think the past gives them a clear lesson, but the lesson is shaped by what they now know, not what they knew when it mattered. The illusion also feeds blame. When something bad happens, people want a cause. They want someone to point to. They say, how could they not have seen this coming? But the truth is, they didn't, and maybe no one could have. But once the outcome is known, the warning signs seem to glow in the dark. The path looks obvious in reverse. That doesn't mean it was obvious in real time. Journalists often write as if the future is a straight line from the past. After a crash, a scandal, a collapse, the story becomes clean. It was clear from the beginning. But that's not how events unfold. At the start, there are always many paths. The brain just prefers one clean story over many messy ones. It trades accuracy for clarity. The illusion also affects risk. If you think past outcomes were predictable, you underestimate how random future outcomes might be. You become too sure of your models. You expect the world to make sense the same way it does in hindsight. But uncertainty doesn't go away just because the past has been explained. You see this in investing. People look at a chart and say, it was obvious that the price would drop there. But at the time, many people thought it would rise. The chart looks clean now, but back then, it was just noise. Traders made bets based on their best guess. The loss didn't prove they were wrong. It proved the future was uncertain. To escape the illusion, you have to practice staying close to the moment of choice. Ask what was known then. What options were real? What doubts were valid? What noise was in the system? Try to hold on to the feeling of not knowing. Write down predictions before you see the outcome. Track your confidence. Review what you guessed and what surprised you. You also have to separate quality from result. A good decision can lead to a bad outcome. A bad decision can work out fine. Hindsight confuses the two. It tells you that whatever happened was bound to happen. That lie keeps you from learning. You can't improve if you think the game was rigged from the start. The mind wants neat stories. It wants meaning. But the world is not always neat. Not every outcome is a sign. Sometimes it's just what happened. The past can teach you, but only if you remember what it felt like to be in the dark. You wake up, check your phone, get dressed, eat the same breakfast, drive the same route to work, sit at the same desk, talk to the same people, answer the same kind of emails. Then you blink, and it's Friday. Another week gone. You struggle to remember what happened. Nothing stood out. Nothing felt new. That's the existential compression illusion. Your brain doesn't measure time like a clock does. It tracks experience, not hours. And when experiences repeat, when they feel familiar, your brain stores less. It compresses the memory. It saves space by removing the details. On the outside, it may look like life is moving at a normal pace. But inside, it feels like time is speeding up. Weeks blur, months slip by, years shrink. This isn't just a feeling, it's a function of how memory works. When something is new, your brain pays attention. It processes the details, colors, shapes, sounds, people, steps. It breaks the event into pieces and stores them carefully. That work takes effort, but it also makes the moment feel longer. A first day at a new job feels packed. A first trip to a new place stretches out. Your brain records more, so it feels like more happened. Familiarity has the opposite effect. When you know what to expect, your brain takes shortcuts. It notices less. It stores less. It treats repeated experience as one unit. One Monday becomes just like the last. One commute blends into the next. Over time, the repeated moments pile up, but they don't fill your memory. When you look back, they collapse into almost nothing. You've probably felt this on vacation. The first few days feel long and rich. You're in a new place, doing new things, seeing new sights. Your brain stays alert. But near the end of the trip, time starts to speed up. You've adapted. You've formed patterns. You've started to predict what comes next. As novelty fades, so does the stretch in time. The same pattern shows up in childhood. When you're young, almost everything is new. You learn quickly, experience intensely, and remember in detail. A single summer can feel like a lifetime. But as you age, life settles. You form routines. You stop noticing changes. The days feel shorter, not because they are, but because you store less of them. This illusion can lead to regret. People look back on a decade and feel like it disappeared. They wonder where the time went. But the time didn't vanish. The memories did. Or more precisely, the brain didn't save them in the first place. Without novelty, there's no reason to. So the timeline folds. It flattens. What felt full in the moment becomes empty in reflection. It's not just memory. It's perception too. When you're doing something new or difficult, time slows down. A scary moment, like a near car crash, feels like it takes longer. That's because your brain speeds up under stress. It captures more frames. But when you do something familiar, like brushing your teeth or walking a hallway, your brain switches to autopilot. It predicts each step and filters out the rest. The world speeds up, not because the seconds change, but because the brain stops tracking them. This compression also affects how you make decisions. If you feel like time is slipping, you may look for ways to get it back. You might chase new experiences or buy things that promise excitement. But the fix isn't speed or stuff. It's attention. The brain stretches time when you pay close attention. It compresses time when you don't. Some people try to fight this by avoiding routine. They change their route to work, try new foods, pick up new hobbies. Others build novelty into structure. They block out time for surprise. They don't wait for something interesting to happen. They plan for it. They know that without effort, the days shrink. You don't need big changes to break the illusion. Even small shifts can help. You can notice the weather instead of checking your phone. You can listen to a new kind of music. You can have a different kind of conversation. These aren't major events, but they pull the brain off autopilot. They leave a trace. That trace stretches the day. There's another layer too. Emotion shapes memory. A boring day might vanish, but a day filled with emotion, even sadness, leaves a stronger mark. Your brain tags emotional moments as meaningful. It stores them in sharper detail. That's why some hard days stand out. They were uncomfortable, but they felt real. The brain remembers them because it had to work through them. The danger of the illusion is not just that time feels fast. It's that you stop noticing you're alive. The world becomes background noise. You go through the motions, do what's expected, follow the schedule. But later, when you look back, you have nothing to hold on to. The days were lived, but not experienced. They passed, but they left no shape. People sometimes call this burnout. But it's not always about energy. It's about engagement. The brain needs input. It needs pattern breaks. Without them, it starts to coast. It stops marking time. That's when the blur begins. You can see the same pattern in relationships. At the start, every conversation feels electric. Every detail stands out. But over time, things feel faster, not because the love is gone, but because the brain has stopped recording the details. The partner becomes familiar. The words become expected. To stretch time again, you have to notice each other on purpose. You have to interrupt the pattern. Some people try to escape the illusion by chasing constant novelty, but that can backfire. If everything is new all the time, the brain stops recording that too. It treats the noise as noise. The key isn't endless stimulation. It's mindful variation. New things at the right pace, with enough space to notice them. The illusion isn't a failure. It's efficiency. The brain has limited space and energy. It can't record every second. So it saves effort by skipping what it already knows. But the cost of that efficiency is the feeling that life is shrinking, that you're not really here. The brain gives time, shape through memory, and memory needs input. If you want the days to slow down, you don't need to do more. You need to notice more. The clock won't change, but the experience of time will. And that's what you feel in the end. Not the hours, but the depth. Not how long something took, but how much it held. You're in a cafe, talking with a friend. They say the man was given a book by the teacher. A few minutes later, You say, "The child was handed a cookie by her brother." You don't notice the pattern, you don't think about the structure, but your brain copied the format, not the content, just the shape of the sentence. This is syntactic priming. Syntactic priming happens when your brain repeats a sentence structure you've recently heard or read. It doesn't copy the words, it copies the form. If someone says a sentence in passive voice, you're more likely to respond in passive voice. If someone says a question in a certain way, you'll often mirror the phrasing without meaning to. This copying happens without effort or awareness. Your brain does it quietly, in the background. This illusion is not about laziness or imitation. It's a side effect of how language works in the mind. Producing a sentence is hard. You need to pick the right words, arrange them in a grammatical order, and adjust for tone and meaning. The brain tries to make that process easier. One way it does that is by reusing recent structures. If you just heard a certain form, that form is already active. Using it again saves mental energy. Researchers have tested this with experiments. In one setup, a person hears a sentence like "the girl was chased by the dog." Then they see a picture, maybe a man pushing a cart, and are asked to describe it. People who just heard a passive sentence are more likely to describe the picture using another passive sentence. "The cart was pushed by the man." If they heard an active sentence first, they're more likely to say, "The man pushed the cart." The content doesn't matter. The frame does. The effect holds even when people don't remember the original sentence. The brain keeps the structure in working memory. It floats just below awareness, ready to guide the next sentence. This helps keep conversations smooth. When two people mirror each other's sentence forms, they understand each other more easily. There's less need to adjust. The rhythm stays in sync. You've probably noticed this when talking to someone with a strong dialect or a formal tone. After a few minutes, you start matching them. You might use phrases you don't normally say. You might drop or add words. You adjust without meaning to. You don't copy their vocabulary as much as their sentence shape. This matching helps you connect. It signals that you're engaged. This kind of copying isn't just social. It shows up in writing too. If you read a book with long, winding sentences, you're more likely to write that way afterward. If you read short, clipped prose, your writing tightens up. The structures you read prime your brain for how to build new ones. You feel like you're choosing your style, but often, you're following the last path your brain walked. Syntactic priming helps explain why some conversations feel easy. When people match each other's grammar, things flow. They finish each other's thoughts, not by guessing words, but by following the same structure. That shared rhythm creates fluency. But the same effect can also limit creativity. When your brain keeps using the same forms, you may stop exploring others. You may believe your style is fixed, when it's actually shaped by your surroundings. Writers sometimes fight this effect by changing their input. They read different genres, study new sentence types, or work with editors who push them to rephrase. They do this to break patterns. They know that what they write is partly a mirror of what they've just read or heard. They try to take control of that mirror. The illusion of originality is strong. You may think your voice is unique. Much of what you say or write borrows from patterns around you. That's not a flaw. It's a feature of how language spreads. Structures survive because they're easy to reuse. They move from speaker to speaker without needing to be taught. They carry rhythm, form, and tone across space and time. Language teachers sometimes use syntactic priming on purpose. They expose students to certain forms, then ask them to speak or write. Students are more likely to use the target structures, even if they don't know the rule behind them. The form slips in through use, not through study. That's how children learn too. They don't memorize grammar. They hear patterns and reuse them. This effect also shows up in legal settings. The way a lawyer frames a question can shape how a witness answers. If a lawyer uses passive voice, was the item taken by the defendant? The witness is more likely to reply in passive voice. That shift can influence how responsibility or agency is perceived. The grammar shapes the tone, which shapes the meaning. In politics and media, syntactic priming helps explain how certain phrases spread. When leaders use a certain way of speaking, short, direct, and repetitive, those structures echo in responses. Interviews, headlines, and commentary start to reflect the same forms. The content may change, but the skeleton stays. This makes certain ideas feel more familiar. The mind trusts familiar shapes. Even jokes use syntactic priming. A setup with a certain structure primes you to expect a certain punchline form. The twist works because it shifts the expected grammar or rhythm. The joke surprises you by breaking the form you just got used to. That break is funny because it highlights how much you were following the frame without realizing it. You can't stop syntactic priming, but you can notice it. You can pause after a conversation and ask, did I copy how they were speaking? You can look at a paragraph you wrote and ask, is this how I would normally write, or am I following something I just read? These questions don't stop the effect, but they shine a light on it. The illusion is not that you have no control. It's that you think you have more than you do. Your words feel like yours. But their form, how they're built, is often borrowed. Your brain is tuned to match. It does that to make speaking easier, to keep rhythm with others, to stay clear. That's how language flows. You don't invent every sentence. You follow the current. You shape it a little, and it shapes you right back. You walk into a room and feel that something's off. You don't know why. You glance at someone's face and get a sense that they're lying, but you can't explain what tipped you off. You choose the right answer on a test without knowing how you got there. You make the right call at work even though you feel unsure. Later, you try to explain your choice, but the words don't come easily. This is the blind insight effect. Blind insight is when you make an accurate judgment without knowing the basis for it. You get the answer right, but you don't know why. It's not a guess, though it may feel like one. You have no clear reasoning to point to. Still, your brain lands on the right choice. The knowledge is there, but you're not aware of having it. This is different from a lucky guess. In a guess, you pick without preference. Blind insight shows up when people consistently perform above chance even when they say they're unsure. In studies, people may take a test where they read brief statements and judge whether each one is logical or not. After each answer, they rate how confident they feel. Often, they're not confident, but their answers turn out to be right more often than chance would allow. They say they don't know, but they act like they do. This gap between performance and awareness shows how complex decision-making can be. You don't always know what you know. Your brain processes more than you can verbalize. It picks up on patterns, signals, and cues that never reach conscious thought. These details build a sense, a feeling of correctness, even when you can't explain it. This process starts early in life. Infants can sense patterns in language before they understand speech. They can tell when a rhythm breaks, even if they don't know what rhythm is. They react when a familiar voice changes tone. These reactions happen without language. They show that the brain learns to read signals before it knows how to name them. Adults do the same thing in more complex ways. An experienced firefighter might sense that a building is about to collapse, even if everything looks fine on the surface. A chess player might reject a move without knowing why, and later realize it would have led to a trap. A teacher might feel that a student is struggling before any signs appear in their work. These judgments come from experience, not from step-by-step analysis, but from accumulated patterns. Blind insight works through unconscious processing. Your brain gathers data, finds a match, and pushes forward a result, but it doesn't always send the reasoning along with it. So you end up with a feeling of being right, but no story to explain it. That can be confusing. You might dismiss your own judgment because it doesn't come with evidence. Or you might trust it too much and stop checking it. That's the risk. Blind insight is not perfect. It can be right often, but not always. When people rely on it too heavily, they may make errors and justify them after the fact. They mistake the feeling of being right for proof, but the feeling comes from a different system than the logic does. You can feel sure and still be wrong, or feel unsure and still be right. This effect also shows up in situations with emotional weight. You might meet someone and feel uneasy. You might decide not to take a shortcut home, even though it looks safe. Later, you find out there was a reason to worry. Your brain registered a mismatch, an odd behavior, a strange silence, a break in a pattern. You couldn't explain it at the time, but your body acted. Your mind was slower to catch up. In labs, this has been tested with visual cues. People may be shown images for a fraction of a second, too fast to fully register. Then they're asked to make a choice based on what they saw. They claim they didn't see anything, but their answers still reflect what was shown. The image didn't reach conscious awareness, but the brain recorded enough to guide behavior. This ties into gut feelings. People often say, "I had a gut instinct." They treat it as something separate from reason. But gut feelings often come from fast processing of real data. It's not magic. It's memory, experience, and attention running beneath awareness. You've seen this kind of situation before. You've learned how it usually ends. That learning surfaces as a feeling, not a thought. Blind insight can be useful in everyday life. You make hundreds of small decisions each day. You don't have time to explain each one. You rely on fast judgments to get through. Most of the time, they work. But to use this system well, you have to test it. You can't just trust the feeling. You have to look back and ask, was that right? Over time, you learn when to trust your instincts and when to pause. This is also why reflection helps. If you make a decision that turns out well, don't just move on. Ask yourself what led you there. Try to trace the source. Did you notice a tone of voice, a pause, a pattern? You may not always find a clean answer, but the process helps. It turns unconscious knowledge into something you can access next time. You can train blind insight by exposing yourself to more examples. Radiologists learn to spot tumors by seeing thousands of scans. They learn what off looks like. They can't always explain it in words, but they recognize the shape. The same is true in other fields: music, law, writing, negotiation. The more patterns you've seen, the more your brain can match without effort. Your conscious mind may not keep up, but your decisions sharpen anyway. The illusion is thinking that knowledge always feels like knowledge, that being right always feels confident. But it doesn't. You can be right and unsure. You can make the right choice and still doubt yourself. That doubt doesn't mean you failed. It means you acted before your thoughts caught up. The insight was real. You just couldn't see it yet. You look at an old photo from 5 years ago. At the time, that day felt hard. Maybe it was a birthday you didn't enjoy, a trip where something went wrong, or a gathering where you felt out of place. Now, you look at the same photo and feel something different. Maybe a quiet warmth, maybe nostalgia, maybe even pride. The photo didn't change, the memory didn't change, but the meaning shifted. This is perceived meaning drift. The brain doesn't store emotional value as a fixed number. It doesn't lock in how something felt and keep it stable. Instead, it updates that meaning over time. The event stays the same, but its weight, shape, and tone change as your perspective changes. The brain reevaluates memories. It resorts experiences. It decides again how much something matters, what it means, and how you should feel about it now. This shift happens with both good and bad memories. A painful breakup that once felt sharp may later feel necessary. A success that once felt huge might now seem small. A job you hated might look like the start of growth. These aren't lies, they're reinterpretations. The memory stays, but the meaning drifts. This is how the brain makes sense of time. If every moment stayed frozen in its original emotional state, the mind would be overwhelmed. You'd keep reliving old pain. You'd stay stuck in past joy. But the brain needs to stay flexible, so it updates the value of the past based on what you've learned since then. This helps you grow. It helps you survive. Think of someone who didn't get a job they really wanted. At the time, it felt like failure, rejection, proof that they weren't good enough. But years later, they might see that moment as a turning point. That loss opened space for something better. The meaning changed. It's still the same event, but the emotion attached to it shifted as new context formed around it. The same happens with grief. Early on, the pain feels close, raw, untouchable. Time passes. The same memory might still hurt, but the hurt changes shape. It becomes quieter, or softer, or tied to a deeper sense of connection. The loss didn't reverse, but the way the brain holds it changed. People sometimes revisit places from their past and feel this directly. A school hallway that once felt overwhelming now feels small. A street that once held excitement now feels calm. The physical space is the same, but you're not. You carry a new framework into the memory. That framework alters the emotional layer. This drift can work both ways. A good memory might turn sour. You look back at a relationship and see signs you missed. You reframe it. What once felt safe now feels false. What once felt real now feels scripted. These shifts can be unsettling. They make memory feel unstable, but they show that your mind keeps working on your story. It doesn't settle. This flexibility helps you adjust. You don't just react to your past, you reshape it to serve your present. That can mean finding peace with things you can't change, or building strength out of difficulty, or recognizing mistakes more clearly. The drift gives you tools. It helps you update meaning to match what you now know. People often say time heals, but it's not time alone. It's this slow internal resorting. The brain keeps running quiet calculations in the background. It links new experiences to old ones. It asks, what did that mean really? And updates the answer. That's not forgetting, that's rewriting. Not the facts, just the frame. This can cause tension in relationships. Two people may share a past experience, but drift in how they remember it. One sees it as bonding. The other sees it as pressure. One sees a fight as growth. The other sees it as a warning sign. Each version feels true. Each one is shaped by how the brain reread the moment. You may notice this when telling a story for the second or third time. The first time, you focus on the anger. Later, you highlight the confusion. After a while, you focus on what you learned. The facts stay mostly the same, but your tone, your framing, and your emotional message shift. You didn't lie, you evolved. This drift is clearest when you compare how you feel now with what you wrote down then. Old journals, letters, or recordings show what your mind focused on at the time. You may be surprised. The things you cared about, the things you feared, the way you described yourself, they may feel distant now. That's not failure. That's progress. Your brain didn't freeze. It kept moving. Perceived meaning drift is not about erasing the past. It's about reintegrating it. The same moment can be seen in different lights. The same choice can carry different lessons. This doesn't make memory untrustworthy. It makes it alive. You don't relive the past. You reread it. Each time, your mind sees it with new eyes. This drift also explains why people rewatch old movies or reread books. The story hasn't changed, but they have. The same scene pulls a new emotion. A line that once seemed boring now carries weight. A character that once felt distant now feels familiar. The meaning wasn't fixed. It was waiting to be reinterpreted. This happens even in daily life. You walk out of a meeting feeling defeated. But later, when things settle, you see what you missed. Maybe your point landed. Maybe the tension helped. Maybe it was just one moment in a long process. The event didn't change. Your grip on it did. Memory is not a recording. It's a story. The brain updates it as the story grows. That's how you make sense of your life. Not by locking every feeling in place, but by allowing the emotional meaning to move. Drift is not distortion. It's adaptation. The past stays still, but your place in relation to it shifts. So the meaning has to shift too. You see a blue wall. Someone next to you sees the same wall and also calls it blue. But if you speak Russian and they speak English, your brains handle the colors slightly differently. In Russian, light blue and dark blue are two separate basic colors, Goluboy and Sini. The split forces Russian speakers to pay closer attention to that distinction. When tested, they're faster at telling apart shades of blue than English speakers. The difference is small, but consistent. This is the linguistic relativity illusion. You feel like you see the world as it is, that your language simply gives names to things that already exist. But the structure of your language can shape how you experience space, time, number, and even events. The effect is subtle. It doesn't stop you from seeing what's there, but it shifts what you notice. It nudges what you pay attention to. It guides how you organize thought. And because language feels natural, you rarely notice it's happening. Some languages divide space not by left and right, but by cardinal directions. Speakers of certain Aboriginal languages in Australia say things like, "There's an ant on your southwest leg," or "The glass is north of the plate." From a young age, they learn to stay oriented in the landscape. They don't rely on their own body as the reference point. They rely on the world around them. This shapes how they think about motion, how they describe locations, and how they remember events. It becomes second nature. If you tested them indoors, they could still point to the cardinal directions without hesitation. Their language keeps them grounded. Languages also differ in how they treat time. English speakers tend to picture time as moving left to right, past on the left, future on the right. That matches how they read and write. Mandarin speakers often imagine time moving vertically, with the future below and the past above, which reflects parts of their written language. In some cultures, time flows east to west, following the sun. These directions show up in gestures. Ask someone to lay out a timeline, and their hand movements will reflect how their language orders time. The physical motion follows the mental model. Grammar shapes thought too. Some languages force speakers to mark the difference between ongoing and completed actions. Others don't. Some require you to include the gender of a noun. Others skip that entirely. In English, you must say, "He is running" or "she is running." In Japanese, you can skip the subject altogether. These differences sound minor, but they affect how speakers remember details, how they group objects, and how they assign blame. In one study, English and Spanish speakers watched a video of someone accidentally popping a balloon. English speakers said, "He popped the balloon." Spanish speakers said, "The balloon popped." The event was the same, but the language shaped how people described it. That, in turn, affected how much they remembered about the person involved. When the sentence had a clear subject, people were more likely to recall the actor's face. When the sentence focused on the event, the actor faded from memory. Language also shifts how we perceive numbers. In some Amazonian languages, there are no exact words for numbers beyond 5. The speakers can still understand more or less, or estimate quantities, but they don't count in the way most people do. When tested, they perform well at tasks involving small amounts, but struggle with larger ones. It's not that they're less intelligent, it's that their language doesn't carve the world into units in the same way. Even metaphor affects thinking. In English, we often talk about arguments as battles. "He shot down my point," "she defended her idea." In other languages, arguments are more like dances or journeys. These frames shape how people think about conflict. If you see debate as war, you may approach it with aggression. If you see it as collaboration, your goals shift. The words set the tone. The illusion lies in thinking that language only helps us label what we already see, but often it helps decide what we see in the first place. The categories in your language guide attention. If your language has no word for a certain idea, you may still grasp it, but it may take longer or feel harder to describe. If your language splits one category into two, your mind tracks the difference more closely. That doesn't mean you're trapped in your language. You can still learn new ideas, express new thoughts, and adjust your mental habits. But it takes effort. You have to notice what your language highlights and what it hides, and that's difficult because the habits feel automatic. You rarely stop to ask, how does my language shape this thought? Multilingual speakers often feel the difference. They may find themselves thinking differently in each language. A person might feel more formal in German, more playful in Spanish, more logical in English. They might express emotion more easily in one language than another. That's not just about vocabulary. It's about structure, tone, and rhythm. The shift in grammar and metaphor pulls their mind into a different mode. They notice different things, take different mental shortcuts, even feel slightly different versions of themselves. Even body language can change. Some cultures use the same gesture to mean "come here," that others use to mean go away. Facial expressions, hand movements, and personal space are all tied to what feels normal in a given language group. These habits reinforce how meaning is built and how it's shared. You might think of language as transparent, a tool you use to express what's already in your mind, but in practice, it's more like a lens. It sharpens some parts of experience and blurs others. It sets your mental defaults. It tells you which distinctions matter, and once you learn a language, you stop noticing how much work it's doing. To test this, try describing a simple event, like setting a cup on a table, in a few different languages. You'll notice that each one asks for different information. One might need to know the gender of the cup. Another might mark whether you did it on purpose. Another might skip details you thought were essential. Each sentence feels natural within its language, but the content shifts. The illusion is not that language distorts reality. It's that it filters it, quietly and constantly, without telling you it's doing so. The world doesn't change, but what you pay attention to does. You think you see the same thing everyone else sees, but you see it through the shape your language gives it. And the shape fits so well, you don't notice it's there. You read a sentence in clear black text on a white screen. It's short, simple, and well-spaced. You nod along, it seems true. Now take the same sentence and put it in a pale gray font on a cluttered background, or stretch it across a long, messy paragraph. Suddenly, it feels harder to trust. You may not notice the change, but your brain does. This is the cognitive ease trap. Cognitive ease is the feeling that something is easy to process. When your brain reads, hears, or sees something without friction, it rewards that experience. The content feels smooth, it feels familiar, and that feeling gets misread as truth. When information is easy to digest, your mind treats it as more reliable, even if it's wrong. This isn't just about fonts or colors, it runs through all communication. When something feels easy, your guard drops. When something feels difficult, your brain becomes skeptical. The ease or difficulty of the message affects your judgment, even though it has nothing to do with the facts. Researchers have shown this in experiments. People read trivia statements like, "A bat can eat up to 1,000 mosquitoes in an hour." The sentence is either printed in a clean, high-contrast font or a blurry, hard-to-read one. When asked if the statement is true, people are more likely to say yes when the font is clear. It feels smoother. That smoothness gets mistaken for accuracy. The same thing happens with rhyming. A statement like, "Woes unite foes," feels more believable than "Woes unite enemies," even though they say the same thing. The rhyme adds fluency. Fluency feels good, and your brain confuses that good feeling with correctness. It also happens with repetition. The more often you hear something, the more true it feels, not because it's backed by evidence, but because it sounds familiar. A false claim repeated enough times becomes sticky. It slips past your filters. You stop questioning it, not because you proved it, but because your brain has stopped treating it as new. Familiarity becomes a stand-in for truth. This makes slogans powerful. Short, repeated phrases wear grooves in your brain. Just do it. Make America great again. No pain, no gain. These lines carry rhythm and repetition. They are easy to remember, easy to repeat, and they feel true, even when they're vague or empty. The ease becomes part of the belief. You also see this in visuals. Clean design adds trust. A well-lit photo looks more honest than a dark or grainy one. A simple graph feels more accurate than a complex table. The smoother the presentation, the more reliable it seems. Your brain assumes that ease equals credibility, even though many lies are dressed in clarity. This is a trap, because real truth is not always smooth. It's often messy, complex, uncomfortable. New information can feel hard to process. That difficulty signals effort, but your brain may read it as a red flag. It might feel wrong just because it's unfamiliar, and that feeling can make you reject it. Think about how you react to someone speaking slowly or with an accent. The extra effort required to follow them can make you trust them less, even if they're correct. Or When reading a legal document full of jargon, your brain struggles and you feel skeptical. But that feeling reflects the challenge, not the true value. Marketers and politicians use this trap. They aim for ease. They pick short names, clean logos, and simple statements. They want you to feel fluent. That fluency lowers your defenses. If they used long words, complex arguments, or slow delivery, you'd start thinking critically. But with easy messages, you're more likely to agree automatically. You even do this to yourself. When writing an email or giving a speech, you favor phrases that flow. You trim what's hard. That makes sense. It helps your message land. But it also means you may be avoiding depth. You're shaping content not by accuracy, but by fluency. And others will respond to it the same way. If it sounds smooth, they'll nod. If it sounds rough, they'll pause. This doesn't mean you should make things hard on purpose, but it does mean you need to watch the link between ease and belief. Ask yourself, do I believe this because it's true, or because it was easy to read? That one question can break the illusion. There's also a trap inside thinking itself. If an idea fits your existing view, it feels easy, so your brain labels it as true. If it clashes, it takes more effort to understand. That effort feels bad, so your brain may label the idea as false, not because of logic, but because it required more work. This is how echo chambers form. People repeat what's easy. They stop noticing what's true. This effect shows up in education. Students may trust a teacher who speaks clearly more than one who doesn't, even if both are equally smart. They may like textbooks that use short sentences over ones that explore ideas in depth. When ease becomes the goal, learning becomes shallow. It feels satisfying, but it doesn't stick. The same thing happens in media. Headlines are designed for fluency. They're short, bold, easy to share, but that ease can carry misinformation. People scroll, scan, and share without reading the full story. The brain registers the headline as truth because it came in smooth. Even corrections don't erase the effect. Once a false idea has entered smoothly, it stays lodged. To resist the trap, you have to slow down. Notice how you feel when reading or hearing something. Ask if the message felt true because it was familiar, well-written, or easy to follow. Then ask what you'd think if it came in a harder form. Would you still trust it? Some truths will always feel rough. Some lies will always feel smooth. The brain wants to trust what flows. That's natural, but easy isn't always honest, and smooth isn't always real. The hard part is knowing the difference. You're watching a stream of letters flash on a screen. Each one appears for a fraction of a second. Somewhere in the mix, you're told to look for the letter X. A moment later, you're told to also watch for the letter K. The first target flashes by and you catch it. Your brain locks on. You recognize it, but then you miss the second letter, even if it appeared just a few steps after the first. It was there, but you didn't see it. Your eyes didn't blink, but your attention did. That gap is called attentional blink. Attentional blink is the short period, around 200 to 500 milliseconds, after detecting a target where your brain becomes temporarily blind to new information. It happens because processing that first target uses up your limited attention. Your brain gets busy locking the first item into awareness, and during that brief window, it fails to notice the next. This isn't just about flashing letters. It happens in everyday life. Imagine someone throws you a tennis ball and says your name at the same time. You focus on the ball, catch it, and only realize later that you missed what they said. Or you're reading an article, a loud noise distracts you, and then you realize you skipped an entire sentence. Your senses worked fine, but your attention dropped. There was a blink. The illusion comes from how awareness feels. You think you're taking in everything around you. You don't feel gaps. You don't feel blind. But these blinks are real, and they happen all the time. Your brain works like a camera with a slow shutter. It can't capture 2 frames in quick succession without missing the second. Researchers discovered this using rapid serial visual presentation, or RSVP. In these experiments, symbols appear one after another, each for just a tenth of a second. Subjects look for two targets buried in the stream. If the second target comes less than half a second after the first, people usually miss it. But if it comes a bit later, say after 7 or more items, they spot it just fine. That short delay between the first and second is where attention shuts down. What's happening in the brain is simple, but important. When you notice the first target, your attention system kicks in. That involves selecting the item, filtering distractions, and moving the data into conscious memory. This process uses resources. While those resources are engaged, new input gets ignored. The brain doesn't process it deeply enough to reach awareness. The signal arrives at your eyes or ears, but it fades before you can grab it. Some researchers compare this to a bottleneck. Only one piece of information can pass through at a time. If something else tries to enter too soon, it gets blocked. Others think of it as a brief refractory period, a recovery time after one burst of processing before the next can begin. Interestingly, the second item isn't completely invisible. Brain scans show that the information does enter sensory areas. It activates early stages of visual processing, but the signal weakens before it reaches higher attention areas. You don't consciously register it, so it feels like it never happened. This matters in more ways than you'd expect. In real life, the blink can cause you to miss critical information. In driving, for instance, if you focus on one hazard, you might miss the next one, especially if it appears right after. Emergency responders, pilots, and soldiers are trained to manage attention because the blink can be costly. In fast-paced environments, even a half-second gap can matter. Emotion can sometimes break through the blink. In studies, if the second item is emotionally charged, a word like danger or death, people are more likely to see it. That's because the brain has priority systems. It flags certain words or images as more important. These may push through the bottleneck, even during the blink. But most neutral stimuli get lost. Your blink isn't always the same length. It changes based on context. If you're tired, distracted, or under pressure, the blink may stretch. You may miss more. On the other hand, if you're well-rested and focused, the blink shortens. You process more, but there's always some delay. The illusion of seamless awareness is never quite real. Some people try to train their attention to reduce the blink. Practice helps, but only a little. You can learn to spot the second target more often. You can slow down the first response so the brain stays open longer. But the blink doesn't disappear. It's built into how human attention works. Multitasking makes it worse. If you're already managing two things, like texting and watching TV, then switch to something else. Your attention gets split. A new item may come in during the blink and get dropped completely. That's one reason why phone use during important tasks, like driving, is so dangerous. You can look but not see, hear but not register. Your attention isn't just divided, it's staggered. As one part comes online, the next shuts down. You might think that your brain can work around this by speeding up. But speed makes the blink more likely. The faster things happen, the more pressure on attention. Your mind can't hold two targets at once. It has to pick one. So if the second target shows up too soon, it's ignored. Memory also plays a role. Even if your senses catch something during the blink, the brain may fail to store it. That leads to another illusion. The idea that if you didn't remember it, it didn't happen, but many signals pass through your eyes or ears without making it into conscious thought. They pass in silence. The blink also connects to how we read and listen. Writers and speakers often repeat key points, not just to persuade, but because the first pass may get missed. You blink without knowing. A sentence may contain two important ideas, but you latch onto the first and forget the second. That's why pacing matters. Good speakers pause. Good writers use rhythm. They give the brain space. Even in conversations, you blink. Someone says something, and your brain grabs one part. While it processes, the next part goes by unnoticed. That's why misunderstandings happen. You weren't ignoring the other person. You just weren't ready to hear what came next. The attentional blink illusion isn't just a quirk of experiments. It shapes daily life. It creates blind spots that feel like complete awareness. You think you saw everything in the moment, but your brain blinked, and something passed by unseen. You remember being a child. You see yourself at age 8, riding a bike, falling off, or laughing in the sun. You might not recall the details, but you feel like that person was you. Not just a memory of something that happened, but a thread that connects straight to who you are now. The same self, stretched across time. But the person who rode that bike didn't think like you. They didn't speak like you. They didn't hold your values. They didn't know what you know now. And if you met them today, you might not even get along. Still, you feel continuous. That sense is the continuity illusion of identity. Your brain builds the feeling of being the same person over time. It needs that stability. Without it, memory would feel chaotic. Decision-making would collapse. Relationships would lose meaning. So your mind strings together the pieces, memories, habits, preferences, and shapes them into a single, steady self. It doesn't matter that many of those pieces have changed. The illusion holds because your brain rewrites the past to match the present. This starts with memory. When you remember a past version of yourself, you think you're looking at something fixed. But memory is not a storage system. It's a reconstruction. Every time you remember, your brain pulls fragments together and builds a version of the event based on who you are now. It smooths the edges. It fills in gaps. It changes tones to match your current values. This makes past you look more like current you. The differences blur. The change becomes harder to see. It also happens with beliefs. Think about something you once believed strongly. Maybe you thought the world was fair, or that love guaranteed happiness, or that hard work always led to success. Now you might see things differently, but when you look back, you often assume you always thought this way, or at least that the change was small and logical. That's because your brain edits the transition. It smooths the arc of belief to make it feel consistent. It hides the gap between old and new. Researchers have shown that people underestimate how much they've changed. When asked to rate their personality traits from 10 years ago, and then compare them to ratings they gave a decade earlier, people are often surprised. Their sense of who they were has shifted to match who they are now. When the differences are obvious, they explain them away as maturity or growth, without recognizing how large the changes actually are. This illusion also affects values. You may think your moral compass is stable, but people's judgments shift with context, age, and experience. Something you once saw as wrong might now feel acceptable, or the reverse. Still, you rarely say, "I used to be a different person with different values." Instead, you treat your current values as the natural endpoint, as if you've always been on this path. Even preferences follow this pattern. You may hate a food now that you used to love, or you may enjoy activities you once avoided. Your music taste changes, your clothing choices shift, but you treat each version as true, as if it reveals the real you. You forget how certain you felt about those old preferences. You assume your current version is final, even though it will likely change again. The illusion helps maintain a sense of self. It holds the past, present, and imagined future in a single frame. It gives you the feeling of agency, that you are the author of your story, not just its subject. It lets you plan, regret, and take pride in a way that depends on stability. But the self is not a single thing. It's a moving system, a layered response to the world, shaped by time and context. You see this clearly when life changes fast. After a major event, a loss, a trauma, a sudden success, you may look back on your past self and feel like you no longer recognize them. You might say, "I don't know who I was then." or that doesn't feel like me anymore. In those moments, the illusion breaks. The gap between versions becomes visible. The illusion also weakens when you look at old writing, listen to old recordings, or read journals. You notice how you spoke, what you cared about, what made you anxious. The person feels familiar but distant. It's like reading about a cousin rather than yourself. You see the traces of your current self, but also the pieces that no longer fit. Even the body changes. Every 7 to 10 years, almost every cell in your body is replaced. You are not made of the same physical parts. Your brain rewires constantly. Habits carve new paths. Stress and sleep alter structure. Yet your sense of self stays smooth. You say I without pausing to ask who that really includes. The illusion is useful. It makes life manageable. It gives you coherence. But it also hides how much potential for change exists. You may feel stuck, not because you can't change, but because the self feels fixed. That illusion says, this is who I am. But it's not a boundary, it's just a snapshot. When people face big decisions, they often try to imagine how they'll feel in the future. But they picture their future self with their current preferences. They expect their desires, fears, and views to hold. Research shows this is a mistake. People underestimate how much they will change. That leads to planning errors, career choices, relationships, and investments based on a version of the self that won't last. This also affects empathy. It's easier to judge your past self than to remember how you felt. You say, "Why did I do that?" without recognizing that past you didn't have your current tools. You had less information, less insight. You were different. Treating past mistakes as if they came from your current self leads to shame. Seeing them as steps on a changing path allows understanding. The same goes for others. You may assume that people stay the same, but they're also changing. Their views, reactions, and priorities move. The illusion of fixed identity can make you lock people into roles: friend, enemy, ally, stranger. Even when they've shifted, it limits growth. The continuity illusion makes the self feel solid. But under that surface, everything changes. Beliefs evolve, memories fade and reshape. Desires come and go. You are not a single thread. You are a river, always moving, always changing course. Still, you call it one name. You say, me, and your brain fills in the rest.